The last box dug into my hip. It was heavy, full of books I'd never read, and it smelled like cardboard and dust. I grunted, shoving it through the doorway of my new apartment with my foot. The door swung shut behind me, the lock clicking with a heavy finality. Home, or whatever this shoebox was supposed to be. The air was still and smelled of stale paint. I dropped the box. It landed with a loud thud that echoed in the empty living room. I needed a beer. But first, the bedroom. My bedroom. The word felt too grand for the space. It was a cube with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. And a mirror. The landlord had left it. A full-length monstrosity with a dark, carved wooden frame. The carvings were strange. Not flowers or patterns, but things that almost looked like faces, twisted and worn smooth by time. It leaned against the wall like an unwanted guest. "Piece of junk," I muttered, my voice sounding loud in the quiet. I walked over to it, meaning to shove it into a corner, but stopped. My reflection looked back at me. Sweaty, tired, hair a mess. Generic dude, age 30, who just spent 8 hours hauling his life up 3 flights of stairs. I raised a hand to wipe the sweat from my forehead. My reflection did the same. Of course it did. But its hand moved a fraction of a second after mine, and its eyes blinked a beat too slow. I froze. I stared hard at the man in the glass. He stared back, perfectly still. Just like me. I blinked. He blinked. I shook my head. My reflection shook its head. Just tired. That's all it was. Exhaustion plays tricks on your eyes. I'd been up since 5, fueled by bad coffee and regret. Of course I was seeing things. I turned my back on the mirror and went to find that beer. Hours later, the sun was gone. The only light came from the blue glow of my phone and the lamp in the living room, which cast long shadows into the bedroom. I stood in the small bathroom, brushing my teeth. The bathroom didn't have a mirror. Just a small medicine cabinet with a plastic door. I spat into the sink. Through the open doorway I could see into the bedroom. I could see the mirror. And in it I could see my reflection. It was standing there, in the dark part of the room. I was here, in the bathroom. It was there, in the mirror. I stood perfectly still, toothbrush in hand. My reflection tilted its head. A slow, slight, curious movement. The foam in my mouth turned sour. My hand stopped moving. What the hell? I kept my eyes locked on it. On me. The figure in the glass didn't move. It just stood there in the darkness, head cocked to the side. The posture was wrong. It was inquisitive. It wasn't me. "No," I said, my voice a low rasp. This was stupid. It was a trick of the light. The angle. I was looking from the bathroom, through a doorway, into a dark room. Of course it looked weird. Annoyance, hot and sharp, cut through the chill. I was letting this old piece of crap get to me. I spat the rest of the toothpaste into the sink, rinsed my mouth, and walked out of the bathroom. I strode directly into the bedroom, right up to the mirror, planting my feet in front of it. The reflection stood there, normal. It was me. Every detail was perfect. The old t-shirt, the worn-out sweatpants. I took a deep breath. It took a deep breath. I ran a hand through my hair. It did the same, a perfect copy. See? Nothing. Fucking weird angles. But the feeling didn't go away. The feeling of being watched. It was coming from the mirror. I knew it. I couldn't stand it. I looked around the room. A spare bedsheet lay balled up in a corner. Perfect. I grabbed it, shook it out, and threw it over the mirror. The dark wood and the gleaming surface vanished under a shroud of cheap, white cotton. The relief was instant. The air in the room felt lighter. The sense of being stared at was gone. I could breathe again. It was just an object, a creepy old object, and now it was covered. Problem solved. I crawled into the sleeping bag I'd thrown on the floor, my actual bed still in pieces. The exhaustion from the day washed over me. The city noises were a distant hum. Sleep. All I needed was sleep. The apartment was quiet. So quiet. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound. I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. I was just about to drift off when I heard it. Creak. A tiny sound. Soft. The sound of old wood groaning under a small shift in weight or temperature. It came from the corner, from the mirror. My eyes snapped open. I told myself it was nothing. The building was old. Wood expands and contracts. That's all it was. I closed my eyes again, forcing myself to relax. The furnace probably kicked on. That's what it was. The silence returned. But it was different now. It was heavy. I was listening to it, waiting. My muscles were tense. I was holding my breath without realizing it. Come on, Jake. Go to sleep. You're an adult. You're not afraid of an old mirror. Tap. It was a small sound. A dry, distinct noise, like a fingernail tapping on glass. It came from behind the sheet. It sounded like it came from the inside. I sat bolt upright. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat in the dead quiet. I couldn't breathe, my ears strained, trying to catch anything, any other sound. There was nothing, just the low hum of the fridge and the frantic thumping in my own chest. Did I imagine it? Was I half asleep? Silence. The silence was worse than the sound. It was an answer. It felt like a presence. It was waiting for me to move, waiting for me to do something. My mind raced. A rat in the walls? A pipe? It had to be something simple. Something explainable. It had to be. But I knew it wasn't. The sound was too clean. Too deliberate. Anger surged through me again, a wave of hot defiance against the cold fear. I wasn't going to lie here in the dark, scared of a noise. This was my place. My home. I threw off the sleeping bag. In 2 long strides, I was across the room, my hand balled into a fist. I was going to throw this damn thing out the window. I didn't care if it shattered on the street below. My fingers closed around the edge of the bedsheet. I braced myself. For what? I didn't know. A monster? A cracked surface? Nothing? Nothing? Nothing. I ripped the sheet away. It flew off the mirror and landed in a heap on the floor. I stared into the glass. My reflection stared back, wild-eyed, chest-heaving, fists clenched. It was a perfect copy, a flawless echo of my own fear and anger. There was nothing behind the glass. No cracks. No one there. Just me. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe the stress of the move, the loneliness of this new city, was finally breaking my mind. It was the only explanation that made any sense. My rage faded, replaced by a hollow confusion. My breathing slowed. I unclenched my fists. My reflection did the same. Hesitantly, my fear now turning into a morbid curiosity, I reached out. I needed to touch it. I needed to feel the solid, real surface of the glass, to prove to myself that this was all in my head. My fingertips reached the mirror, and a shock of cold shot up my arm. It wasn't a normal cold. It wasn't the coolness of glass on a cool night. It was an aggressive, absolute cold. A deep, penetrating cold, like plunging your hand into a bucket of ice water. It felt dead. It felt wrong. It leached the warmth from my skin instantly, a sharp, biting sting that made me snatch my hand back as if I'd been burned. I stared at my fingers. They were pale. The tips almost blue. They throbbed with a cold that felt like it had sunk all the way to the bone. I looked back at the mirror. My reflection looked back at me, and on its face, just for a second, I saw the faintest hint of a smile. Sleep didn't come. It was a cheap imitation. A few hours of twitchy, shallow darkness that left me feeling worse than before. My eyes were gritty. My head ached. The memory of that aggressive cold in my fingers. The phantom smile in the glass. It clung to me like a bad smell. I made coffee. It tasted like ash. I had to work. A deadline for some corporate logo design was breathing down my neck. Money was money. I needed it. I set up my laptop on the one cardboard box sturdy enough to serve as a desk. The bedroom was the only place with a decent outlet. And the mirror. I tried not to look at it. I had thrown the sheet back over it before collapsing last night, a childish gesture that felt stupid in the harsh morning light. But I left it there, a white cotton ghost in the corner. Hours bled together. The click of my mouse was a tiny, rhythmic anchor in the silence of the apartment. I leaned closer to the screen, my face scrunched in concentration. The client wanted synergy and disruption, but also calm and tradition. It was impossible. My jaw was tight, my brow furrowed into a deep line. I needed a break. I leaned back, stretching my arms over my head, and my eyes flickered toward the corner of the room, just for a second. A quick glance. Through a small gap in the sheet, I saw a sliver of the mirror's surface, and in it, a sliver of my face. It wasn't frowning. My hands dropped to my lap. I stared at the wall in front of me. Did I see that? No. Of course not. I was tired. I was staring at a blue-lit screen for hours. My eyes were playing tricks on me. That's all. It had to be. I rubbed my temples, the headache pulsing behind my eyes. Get back to work, Jake. Don't be an idiot. But I couldn't. The thought was a fishhook in my brain. I turned my chair slowly, deliberately, to face the covered mirror. The silence in the room wasn't quiet anymore. It was waiting. I stood up. My legs felt heavy. I walked over and stood before it, my heart a low, heavy drum against my ribs. My hand hesitated for a moment, then I grabbed the sheet and pulled it away. There I was, again. Just a guy in a room. I stared at myself, hard. I forced my expression to remain neutral, a blank mask. I studied the man in the glass. He studied me back. Every detail was right. The tired eyes, the faint stubble, the old gray t-shirt. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. I kept my face like stone. I did not move a muscle. I just looked. And I watched. And I waited. And then I saw it. It started at the corner of the mouth. His mouth. A slow, subtle, almost microscopic pull of a single muscle. It wasn't a smile. A smile has warmth. It has emotion. This was something else. It was an expression of observation, of faint amusement, the kind of look a scientist might give a bug under a microscope just before he sticks it with a pin. "What do you want?" I whispered. The sound was swallowed by the room. My reflection didn't answer. It just kept looking at me with that ghost of a smile, that terrible, knowing look. This wasn't in my head. This was real. This thing, whatever it was looking out at me from inside my own face. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. I needed it out. I needed it gone. Now. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen. I Googled, junk removal, 24/7, emergency. The first number that came up I called. A bored-sounding voice answered. "Yeah, a one hauling." "I need something picked up," I said, my voice tight. "A mirror. A big one. I need it gone today." I could hear the guy sigh on the other end. "A mirror? That's it?" "Yes. It's heavy. I'll pay whatever. Just get it out of my apartment." "Look, man," he said, and I could practically hear him chewing on something. "My earliest slot is Saturday. Maybe Friday afternoon if my guy finishes early." "No, you don't understand," I insisted, my voice rising. "I need it gone now. Right now." "Hey, pal, I got a whole schedule here. It's a mirror. It'll be there on Friday." "Address?" I hung up. Useless. Fine. I'd do it myself. I wasn't going to spend one more night in this room with it. I didn't care if I had to drag it down 3 flights of stairs and leave it on the damn sidewalk. I walked back to it. The thing in the glass watched my approach, its face still holding that hint of a smile. "I'm getting you out of here," I snarled, more to myself than to it. I bent my knees, got a good grip on the thick carved wooden frame. The wood was cold, the same dead cold from last night. I ignored it. I braced my feet, took a deep breath, and heaved. Nothing. It didn't move. It didn't even scrape the floor. It felt like it was made of lead, like it was part of the building's foundation. "Come on," I grunted, putting my whole body into it. My muscles screamed. Veins bulged on my neck. I pulled with everything I had. My reflection pulled too. A perfect mimicry of my strain. But its eyes, those cold, watching eyes, were fixed on mine. And the smile was still there. It knew I couldn't move it. I let go, stumbling back, panting. My hands were raw. My back ached. It was impossible. A mirror that size, it should have weighed 100, maybe 150 pounds. This felt like 1,000. It felt like I was trying to pull the building itself off its foundation. The trap snapped shut. There was no getting it out. There was no one coming to help. I was locked in here with it. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving it, until my back hit the opposite wall. The room, which already felt small, had shrunk to the size of a coffin, and I was trapped inside with the corpse. I had to get out of its sight, just for a minute, just to think. The bathroom. I decided a shower would help. The hot water. The steam. It would be a barrier. It would clear my head. A stupid, rational thought in the face of this thing. But it was all I had. I grabbed a clean towel and a change of clothes, never turning my back on the mirror. I walked sideways into the bathroom and shut the door. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I was safe. For now. I turned the water on, as hot as I could stand it. Steam filled the small room instantly, clinging to the cheap plastic medicine cabinet and frosting the glass door of the shower stall. It was a curtain. A shield. I stepped inside, letting the scalding water beat down on my head and shoulders. For a second, it worked. The sound of the water filled my ears. The steam clouded my vision. There was only the heat and the noise. But I couldn't relax. I kept my eyes on the frosted glass door. Through the swirling steam and running water, I could see the bedroom, a blurry world of indistinct shapes and colors. And I could see the mirror. And in the mirror, I could see the blurry silhouette of my reflection. It was standing right where I'd left it. Good. I closed my eyes. Just breathe. It's an object. It can't hurt you. Then I heard it. Not a sound. A feeling. A change in the air. My eyes snapped open. I looked back at the frosted glass. The silhouette was gone. No, that wasn't right. The silhouette wasn't gone. It had moved. It was no longer standing inside the blurry outline of the mirror. It was standing in the blurry outline of the room. It had stepped out. My breath caught in my throat. The hot water turned my skin to ice. I stood frozen, water plastering my hair to my face. The silhouette in the bedroom began to move. It wasn't the frantic movement of fear. It was a slow, deliberate pace. It walked from the corner where the mirror was, across the blurry shape of my sleeping bag on the floor. It was walking around my room. It was looking for something. It was looking for me. I flattened myself against the tiled wall of the shower, trying to make myself smaller, trying to disappear. The water roared in my ears, but it couldn't drown out the frantic drumming of my heart. This was a nightmare. A waking nightmare. The silhouette paused near the window. It turned its head. Then it started walking again. Slowly. Methodically. Directly toward the blurry shape of the bathroom door. It stopped. It was right outside. A dark, man-shaped patch in the fogged-up glass. Just on the other side. Waiting. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was a rat in a box, and the cat was at the door. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying. Let this be a dream. Let me wake up. Anger, hot and white and pure, erupted through the fear. No more hiding. No more cowering. This was my home. My life. With a raw yell that tore from my throat, I slammed the shower door open. It crashed against the wall. I lunged for the bathroom door, twisted the lock, and threw it open, my fists raised, ready to break, to kill, to face whatever the hell was standing on the other side. The bedroom was empty. The silence rushed back in, deafening. My sleeping bag was on the floor. My laptop was on the box. The window was closed. Everything was exactly as it should be. There was no one there. My chest heaved. My body trembled. Was I crazy? Had I finally, completely lost my mind? Shaking, dripping, I took a step out of the bathroom, then another, and I turned to face the mirror. It was there, my reflection, standing perfectly still. It was wearing the same gray t-shirt, the same worn sweatpants. Its hair was neat. Its skin was dry. It stared at me, its face a blank canvas. No smile. Nothing. Just watching. My eyes dropped from its face, down its dry body to its dry feet, and then I saw the floor. On the bare, dusty wood, leading from the very base of the cold, dark mirror, was a set of footprints. They were wet. They glistened in the dim light of the room, a perfect trail of wet, bare footprints leading from the mirror across the floor and stopping at the threshold of the bathroom. right where I was standing. Sleep was not an option. Not after the wet footprints. Not after seeing that thing step out of the glass. My mind was a live wire, sparking with a fear so raw it tasted like metal in my mouth. I couldn't stay in the bedroom. I couldn't be in the same room as it. I went to the living room. The couch was lumpy and smelled faintly of dust and old pizza boxes, but it was far away from that corner of the apartment. That was enough. I found a 6-pack of cheap beer I'd bought weeks ago, still warm from being left on the counter. I didn't care. I twisted one open, and the hiss was a welcome noise in the suffocating quiet. I turned on the TV, flicking through channels until I found some stupid, brightly lit sitcom. Canned laughter echoed in my empty apartment. A man in a ridiculous sweater was yelling at his neighbor about a hedge trimmer. It was dumb. It was normal. I clung to it. 1 beer became 2, then 3. The alcohol did nothing to the fear, but it started to dull the edges of my panic, weighing down my limbs, blurring the screen. The fake laughter from the TV became a droning hum. My eyelids felt like lead weights. The knot in my stomach was still there, a cold, hard stone, but exhaustion was a tide pulling me under. I wasn't choosing to sleep. I was just losing the fight to stay awake. My head slumped to the side, my cheek pressed against the rough fabric of the sofa. The last thing I heard was another wave of manufactured cheer. I woke up because of the pain in my neck, a sharp, grinding ache from sleeping bent at a bad angle. The room was dark. The TV was off. For a second, I was just a guy with a stiff neck and a bad hangover starting to brew. Then memory crashed back in. The mirror. The footprints. I sat bolt upright. The room was black except for the weak orange glow of a streetlight filtering through the blinds. Silence. The TV was completely off. Sleep timer, I thought. Right. Must have been the sleep timer. My mouth was dry. A shiver ran through me, a deep-seated cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I needed a blanket, and the only blanket I owned was in the bedroom. I stood up, my joints cracking. Every instinct screamed at me not to go in there, to just grab my keys and leave, sleep in my car, go anywhere else. But the cold was real, and the thought of a blanket was a powerful lure. It's just a room, I told myself, just a piece of furniture. You were seeing things. You were terrified, and your brain made it all up. I took a step. Then another. The floorboards were cold under my bare feet. I paused at the bedroom doorway, peering into the deeper darkness within. I couldn't see it from here. It was in the far corner, out of my line of sight. Good. I just needed to grab the blanket off my sleeping bag and get out. Quick. In and out. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I held my breath and slipped into the room. My hand fumbled along the wall for the light switch. I found it. Flipped it. The bare bulb overhead flooded the room with harsh, yellow light. My laptop on the box. The sleeping bag on the floor. And the mirror. I couldn't help but look. I had to. It was a magnetic pull, a morbid need to confirm that everything was normal. My reflection stood there, 10 feet away. Just a guy in a gray t-shirt. Tired. Scared. I started to let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. It was fine. It was just a mirror. My eyes met my reflections. And I froze. There was something wrong with its face. My face. Around the reflection's right eye, the skin was a mess. A deep, ugly purple and blue bruise swelled from the brow to the cheekbone. It was the kind of injury you get from a fist. A bad one. The eye itself was bloodshot and narrowed to a slit from the swelling. It looked horrible. It looked painful. My own hand flew to my face, my fingers probing the skin around my right eye. Nothing. I pressed harder, searching for a bump, a tender spot, any hint of an injury. There was nothing, just smooth, normal skin. No pain. Not even a tiny ache. This can't be happening. I stumbled back a step, my gaze locked on the monstrous bruise in the glass. It was so vivid, I could almost feel the phantom throb of it. My mind raced, trying to find a reason. A trick of the light? A smudge on the glass? No. It was too detailed, too perfect. I turned and fled to the one other mirror in the apartment, the small, cheap medicine cabinet in the bathroom. I didn't bother closing the door. I flicked on the light, leaning in so close my nose almost touched the glass. The fluorescent bulb was unforgiving. It showed every pore, every bit of stubble, but it showed no bruise. My skin was pale from fear, my eyes wide and bloodshot from lack of sleep, but they were both clear. There was no mark, no injury, no discoloration at all. I was fine. I was whole. My shoulders sagged with a wave of dizzying relief. I was crazy. That's what this was. I was having a complete psychotic break. The exhaustion, the stress, it was making me hallucinate. It was the only explanation that made sense. It was terrible, but it was better than the alternative. I took a deep, shaky breath and walked back out into the bedroom, ready to laugh at myself, ready to throw the sheet back over the damn mirror and call a doctor in the morning. I stopped dead in the doorway. I looked at the mirror in the corner, the big one, the old one. He was still there, the man who looked like me, and the bruise was still there, a swollen, violent splash of color on his pale face. He hadn't changed. He was just watching me. But the look in his eye, the one that wasn't swollen shut, had changed. It wasn't menacing. It wasn't angry. It was sorrowful. A look of deep, profound pity, as if he was the one looking at a tragic, broken thing, as if he felt sorry for me. The air left my lungs. The idea that I was just crazy evaporated, replaced by a much colder certainty. This was real. I was sane, and I was in a room with something that was wearing my face like a mask. We stared at each other across the room, me, with my perfect face and my hammering heart. Him with his brutalized reflection and his sad, knowing gaze. The silence stretched, tight and thin. It felt like a wire about to snap. Then he moved, slowly, deliberately. The reflection lifted its left hand. Its movements were fluid, real, not a glitch, not a trick. It raised its arm until its finger was pointing. Not at me, not at itself. It was pointing past me, into the room, toward the darkest corner, to the left of the doorway, where the light from the bulb didn't quite reach. My blood turned to ice. A primitive command screamed through my brain. Don't look! Whatever you do, don't look where it's pointing. But I couldn't stop myself. My body moved on its own. Every muscle tensed. I whipped my head around, my eyes straining to pierce the shadows in the corner. There was nothing there, just bare wall. A few dust bunnies on the floor. The empty, dark corner of an empty, cheap room. The relief was so intense it almost made me sick. I let out a choked half-laugh, half-sob. Nothing. Of course there was nothing. It was playing with me, a sick, twisted game. I turned back to the mirror, a hot surge of anger starting to burn through the fear. I was ready to scream at it, to throw something, to demand what the hell it wanted from me. But the image in the glass stopped me cold. Me in the mirror had lowered its arm. It was looking at me, and it was shaking its head, a slow, gentle, side-to-side motion. The expression on its bruised face was one of pure, heartbreaking disappointment. It wasn't angry. It was just sad, as if I'd failed a test, as if it had tried to warn me about something vital, something life or death, and I had been too blind to see it. That slow shake of the head was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. I don't know how long I stood there, locked in that gaze. Eventually, the anger and the adrenaline faded, leaving only a hollow, bone-deep exhaustion. I stumbled back to the couch in the living room. I didn't get the blanket. I just collapsed onto the cushions and curled into a ball, my eyes squeezed shut. I didn't want to see anymore. I just wanted it all to end. Sometime before dawn, a dreamless, dead sleep finally took me. I woke to gray morning light and a dull, throbbing pain. It was centered on my right eye. I sat up, my mind still thick with sleep. The pain was real, a persistent, pulsing ache, exactly like the aftermath of a hard impact. I swung my legs off the couch and walked on autopilot into the bathroom. I needed painkillers. I opened the medicine cabinet. My hand stopped halfway to the aspirin bottle. I looked at my own face in the bathroom mirror, the same one that had shown me a clear face last night. My own eyes stared back at me. And slowly forming around my right eye, faint but unmistakable, was a small, tender patch of blue and purple. A bruise. Right where the pain was. Right where I had seen it in the other mirror. It wasn't a hallucination anymore. It was on my skin. It was part of me. The pain was an anchor, dragging me from the depths of a sleep that felt more like a coma. A low, insistent throb behind my right eye. It was the first thing I was aware of. The second was the cool, grimy linoleum of the bathroom floor under my back. I must have passed out. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. My head swam. I braced my hands on the sink and looked up. The face in the cheap medicine cabinet mirror was a stranger's. My face, but ruined. The bruise was no longer faint. It was a violent, swollen galaxy of purple, blue, and an ugly, sickly yellow. It had blossomed overnight, a poisonous flower blooming on my skin. The pain wasn't a phantom anymore. It was real. It was mine. This was happening. That single thought cut through the fog of sleep and pain. This was real. Paranoia became my shadow. I had to get out. Had to get food. But the thought of anyone seeing my face sent a spike of cold dread through my gut. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a black hoodie, yanking the hood up so it cast a deep shadow over my face. I kept my head down as I walked to my car, my keys clenched tight in my fist. Every distant car door slam, every voice from an open window felt like an accusation. I went through a drive-through. The disembodied voice from the speaker was a small mercy. I mumbled my order, paid with a card to avoid any human contact, and grabbed the greasy bag. Driving back, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone in the back seat. But there was only me, a guy with a monster's eye hiding in his own car. Everyone on the street was a potential witness. Every glance in my direction felt like a stare, a judgment. They see it, they know. The thought was a frantic, repeating drumbeat in my head. Back in the apartment, I didn't turn on any lights. I ate the cold fries and the lukewarm burger standing in the living room, the city's gray light filtering through the blinds. Every bite tasted like cardboard. I was a prisoner in my own home, a home that was no longer a sanctuary. It was the cage. And the monster was in the cage with me. I needed to wash the feeling away. The grime. The fear. A hot shower. The thought was a small island of normalcy in an ocean of crazy. I stripped in the weak light, my body shivering, and stepped into the bathroom. I turned the knob until the water was almost scalding. Steam filled the small room instantly, clouding the mirror, the tiles, everything. It was good. It felt like a shield. I stood under the spray for a long time, letting the heat soak into my bones, a temporary anesthetic for the throb in my face and the ice in my soul. When I finally turned the water off, the silence crashed back in. Water dripped from the faucet, a slow, steady rhythm. The bathroom was a thick, white fog. I wiped a circle on the small medicine cabinet mirror with my hand. My reflection stared back, distorted by the condensation. The bruised eye looked even worse now, the hot water having brought the blood to the surface. It was a disaster. I grabbed a towel and stepped out of the bathroom, into the bedroom, and stopped. My heart seized in my chest. The air in the bedroom was cool and clear. There was no steam, no fog, except there should have been. The door had been open. The steam should have poured out, clinging to every surface. It clung to only one, the big mirror in the corner. It wasn't fogged over like a normal piece of glass. It was perfectly, unnaturally clear, as if it existed in a different atmosphere. No, not entirely clear. Near the top, in the center, there was a patch of condensation, a small, isolated cloud on an otherwise pristine surface. And on that patch of vapor, as if drawn by a single finger, were two words. Save me. My breath hitched. I took a stumbling step back, my wet foot slipping on the hardwood floor. I hit the wall, the impact jarring my teeth. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't a hallucination. This was a message, written in breath on a cold surface. But the mirror wasn't cold. And the breath wasn't mine. It was communication. Clean, direct, and impossible. A plea from a place that shouldn't exist. My mind raced. Proof. I needed proof. To show someone. A doctor. The cops. Anyone. To prove I wasn't losing my mind. My phone. It was on the floor by my sleeping bag. My hands shook so badly I could barely pick it up. I fumbled with the screen, my thumb slipping on the glass. Camera app. I found it. I raised the phone, my arms trembling, and aimed it at the mirror. I centered the impossible words in the frame. My finger hovered over the shutter button. I looked at the screen, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. On the phone's display, the mirror was just a mirror. Clear glass. It reflected me, a pathetic, half-naked figure, clutching a phone. It reflected the bare walls of the room behind me. But there were no words, no condensation, nothing. It was a perfect, normal reflection of a normal, empty room. I lowered the phone and looked up at the real mirror. The words were still there. Save me, stark and desperate against the clear glass. I raised the phone again. Gone. I lowered it. There. A choked, desperate sound escaped my throat. A sob or a laugh. I couldn't tell. It was playing with me. It controlled what was real. It could write on the glass, but it could erase itself from reality for anyone but me. I was the chosen audience for its sick magic show. There was no proof. There would never be any proof. I was alone with it. Completely and utterly alone. Despair was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I stared at the blank screen of my phone, at my own terrified face looking back at me. A digital ghost. Trapped. Then I saw movement. Not on the phone. In the room. My head snapped up. Me in the mirror was moving. While I was looking at my phone, it had lifted its hand. Its real hand. Not my reflections. Its left hand. Slowly, with a horrifying deliberation, it raised a finger to the patch of condensation, right below the first message. The fingertip touched the glass. New vapor bloomed where it touched. It began to draw. A new word. M-A-R-K. My name. The message wasn't a random cry for help. It was for me. Save me, Mark. Time stopped. The world narrowed to that single, impossible pane of glass. My own name, written by my own doppelganger. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My entire being was frozen in a state of pure, undiluted terror. Then it looked at me. It met my eyes. The bruised, swollen eye and the one good eye fixed on me with an intensity that burned. The sorrow I'd seen before was gone, replaced by a raw, primal terror that mirrored my own. And its mouth, my mouth, began to open. It opened and kept opening, stretching wider than any human jaw should. The skin pulled taut at the corners. The tendons in its neck stood out like steel cables. It was a silent, bottomless maw of a scream. A shriek of absolute agony and horror trapped behind the glass, directed at me. There was no sound, but I felt it in my bones, a vibration that shook my very soul. The dam broke. A scream ripped from my own throat, raw and loud, tearing through the quiet of the apartment. I didn't think. I reacted. I launched myself sideways, scrambling for the bedroom door. I slammed it shut behind me so hard the frame shook. I fumbled with the lock, my wet hands slipping on the knob, then twisted it home. I ran, through the living room, past the sofa. I wrenched the front door open and threw myself out into the hallway. I slammed the door and collapsed against the opposite wall, sliding down to the dirty carpet. My lungs burned. I gasped for air, each breath a ragged, painful sob. The hallway was dim, smelling of stale cigarette smoke and dust. It was ugly. It was real. I pressed my back against the wall, needing to feel something solid, something that wasn't part of that room. Silence. The only sound was my own frantic heartbeat hammering in my ears. How long I sat there, I don't know. Minutes. An hour. The terror slowly receded, leaving behind a hollow, trembling exhaustion. But below that, a new feeling started to grow. A terrible nagging curiosity. I had to know. I had to see. I got to my feet, every muscle aching. I crept back to my front door, my hand shaking as I reached for the knob. I turned it slowly, silently. I pushed the door open, just a crack, just enough to see. My eye aligned with the sliver of a view. Across the living room, through the bedroom doorway, to the mirror. It was just a mirror again. The glass was clear. The words were gone. The condensation had vanished, as if it had never been there. It was empty. Normal. No, not empty. My reflection stood there. It was watching the doorway. It was watching me. It stood perfectly still. Same hoodie I had dropped on the floor. Same bruised, swollen eye. But something was different. On the cheek of the face in the mirror, not the bruised side, the other one, was a single glistening track. A line of wetness that caught the dim light from the hallway. A tear. It was looking right at me, and it was crying. The hallway carpet smelled of old dust and something sour, maybe spilled beer from years ago. It was real. The smell was real. I pressed my back harder against the peeling paint of the opposite wall, the cool plaster a solid fact against my skin. My breath came in ragged gasps. My heart was a wild animal trapped in my ribs. In my mind, I could still see it. The track of that single tear on its cheek. My cheek. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't some snarling demon. It was me. And it was terrified. Or it was crying. Or something. The thought was a splinter of ice in my brain. A plea for help, then my name, then tears. What did it mean? Save me from what? Was it trapped in there? Was that why it was crying? A current of something other than fear shot through me. Pity. A dumb, dangerous pity. I needed to talk to someone. I couldn't keep this inside. It was eating me alive, dissolving my sanity from the inside out. My phone. It was still in my hand, the screen dark. I fumbled it on, my thumb smearing sweat across the glass. My contacts list opened. My finger hovered over the first name. Jessica. My sister. I could call her. I just had to hit the button. She'd pick up. She always picked up. Mark? Is everything okay? She'd say, her voice warm and steady. And I would say, what? The words formed in my head, a silent rehearsal for a play I could never perform. Hey, Jess, so a funny thing is happening. The guy in my mirror, my reflection, well, he started moving on his own. He left me a note. In condensation. And he's crying. Also, he gave me this black eye. I think he wants my help. The screen of my phone went blurry. I was shaking my head. No, I couldn't say that. The words were a one-way ticket to a padded room. They'd think the stress of the new job, the isolation had finally cracked me. They'd send someone. They'd come to the apartment. And what would they find? A normal mirror. A brother who was babbling about impossible things. I could see the looks on their faces, the concern, quickly hardening into fear. Not fear of the mirror, fear of me. My finger moved away from her name. I locked the phone and let my hand drop. The feeling of being alone crashed down on me again. Heavier this time. It wasn't just that no one was here, it was that no one could be here. I was sealed off from the rest of the world by a truth so insane it couldn't be spoken. I sat there for a long time. The hallway was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator from the apartment next door. The world outside my little bubble of horror was going on as normal. People were cooking dinner, watching TV, living. I couldn't stay in the hallway forever. This was my place. I was paying for it. For the musty carpet, the thin walls, and the goddamn portal to hell in my bedroom. Anger started to bubble up, hot and sharp, pushing aside the cold terror. Anger at it. At this thing that had stolen my home, my sleep, my mind. I got to my feet. Every muscle protested. I walked back to my front door, my jaw tight. I turned the knob, unlocked it, and pushed it open. The apartment was still. The air was thick with the aftermath of my panic. I walked through the living room, my bare feet silent on the wood floor. I didn't stop until I stood in the doorway of the bedroom. It was there, waiting. My reflection stood motionless, watching me from across the room. The hoodie was gone. It was bare-chested again, just like me. The dark bruise over its eye was a hideous splash of violence. The tear track was gone. Its face was a blank mask. I took a step into the room, then another. I walked until I was standing right in front of it, close enough to feel the chill coming off the glass. We stared at each other, two identical men, separated by a thin sheet of silvered glass, one real, one not. "What do you want?" I said. My voice was a low growl. It came out rougher than I expected. "What the hell do you want from me?" I didn't expect an answer. I was just yelling at a piece of glass, at a part of my own broken brain. But it moved. Its head didn't tilt. Its eyes didn't blink. But its mouth, my mouth, began to form a shape. It was slow, deliberate. The lips pushed forward, then pulled back. There was no sound. Not a whisper. Just the chilling, silent movement. S-W-A-P. The word hung in the air between us, unspoken but perfectly clear. My heart, which had been hammering, seemed to stop altogether. All the blood in my body turned to ice water. The anger evaporated, replaced by a dread so profound, it felt like a physical weight. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a demand. My throat was dry. I swallowed, the sound loud in the dead quiet of the room. "Swap?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "Swap what?" I watched its face, my own face. Its eyes bored into mine. They weren't sad anymore. They weren't scared. They were flat. Cold. The eyes of something that has a goal and will not be stopped. Its mouth began to move again, slower this time, forcing me to read each letter. P-L-A-C-E-S, places, swap, places. The world tilted. The floor felt like it dropped away beneath my feet. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't a memory. This was an invasion. It didn't want to warn me. It didn't want my help. It wanted my life. It wanted to be out here in this room, in this world. And it wanted me in there. In the cold, silent world behind the glass. The air in my lungs turned to stone. I was looking at my replacement. "No," I choked out. The word was small, pathetic. Its expression didn't change. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. "No!" I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat, raw and full of fury and terror. "Never!" My mind went white with rage. Fight or flight. And I wasn't going to run from my own bedroom. My eyes darted around the room, looking for a weapon, for anything. The cheap wooden chair I used for my clothes was right there. I didn't think. I lunged for it. I grabbed the back of the chair, the wood digging into my fingers. I spun, putting all my weight, all my fear, all my rage into the motion. I let out a yell as I heaved it, sending it flying end over end, directly at the center of the mirror. Directly at its face. As the chair left my hands, I saw the reflection move. It wasn't a reflection anymore. It was a perfect copy. It mimicked my motion exactly, a silent, graceful dance of violence. It lunged for its own chair, spun, and threw it at the same instant I did. My chair flew through the air. Time seemed to slow down. I saw it tumbling, a clumsy, solid weapon about to smash this nightmare to pieces. It was going to hit. It was going to shatter the glass and end this. It got to within an inch of the surface, and it stopped. It just stopped, dead in midair, frozen as if it had hit a wall of solid steel. It hung there for a single, impossible second, its momentum gone, its flight arrested by nothing. Then it dropped. It fell straight down, clattering onto the hardwood floor with a loud, hollow bang that echoed in the silent room. It didn't bounce. It didn't shatter. It just fell. I stared, my mouth hanging open. My breath was gone. My scream had died in my throat. I looked from the chair lying harmlessly on the floor to the mirror. The glass was untouched. Perfect. Pristine. Me in the mirror was still standing there. Its arm was still raised, frozen in the follow-through of its own throw. It didn't look at the chair on my side of the glass. It lowered its arm slowly and looked down at the floor in front of it, where its own phantom chair would have landed. Then, slowly, it lifted its head. Its eyes found mine, and for the first time it smiled. It wasn't my smile. My smiles were small, sometimes crooked. This was a wide, slow, horrible thing. A predator's smile. It was all teeth. It was a smile of pure, absolute confidence. A smile that said, "You see, you can't touch me. You can't fight me. This is my space, and soon your space will be mine too." It held my gaze, the smug, terrifying smile plastered on its face. It knew it had already won. The chair on the floor wasn't just a piece of wood. It was proof that I was trapped. Not in the hallway, not in the apartment. I was trapped in the world. And the only exit was the one place I would rather die than go. The smile, that goddamn smile. It stayed behind my eyelids even when I looked away. It was burned there, a brand mark of victory. It's victory. My legs finally unlocked. I stumbled back, one step then another, until the wall hit my shoulders. I slid down it, my ass hitting the floor hard. I didn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything but the frantic hammering in my chest and the cold, slick sweat on my skin. The chair lay in the middle of the room, a useless piece of wood, a monument to my own weakness. My throat was raw from the scream. I stared at the thing in the mirror. It had dropped the smile. My face was smooth again. Patient. It just stood there, watching me have a complete breakdown on the floor. It had all the time in the world. I didn't. Each second felt borrowed. I had to get out. That was the only thought. Get out of the room. Get out of the apartment. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming, my eyes were locked on it. I wouldn't turn my back on it again. I sidestepped, moving along the wall, my hand trailing against the paint. Like a crab. Pathetic. I kept my eyes on the mirror as I shuffled toward the bedroom door. It didn't move. It just watched me go. That was almost worse. It wasn't trying to stop me. It was letting me leave. It knew I'd be back. I got to the living room and slammed the bedroom door shut. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I stood there, panting, in the dim light of the main room. Safe. For a second. Then the next thought came. It was in my bedroom, in my apartment. I couldn't run. Where would I go? A hotel? And then what? Come back tomorrow? It would still be here. Waiting. No, I couldn't run. I had to understand. I had to know the rules of this sick game. My laptop was on the coffee table. I snatched it open, my fingers fumbling on the keys. What do you even search for? Reflection trying to kill me. The search bar mocked me. I typed in something simpler. Haunted mirror stories. The screen filled with links. Forum posts from a decade ago. Creepypasta articles. Ghost hunter blogs. I clicked and clicked, my eyes burning from the screen's glare. The stories were all different, but they were all the same. Shadows moving, faces twisting, a general sense of dread. None of them mentioned their reflections trying to swap places. None of them talked about their reflection having a goddamn personality. It was all bumps in the night and scary faces. Child's play. This was something else. This was an opponent. An hour passed, too. The internet was a dead end. Just a collection of stories that made the hair on my arm stand up but offered no solutions. No answers. It was useless. I slammed the laptop shut. I needed to calm down. I needed to think. My mouth felt like it was full of sand. I went to the kitchen and pulled a glass from the cabinet, my hand shaking so badly it rattled against the rim of another. I filled it with water from the tap, watching the stream splash and swirl. It was real, cold, normal. I took the glass back into the living room. The bedroom door was still closed. A closed door had never seemed so menacing. I couldn't just hide out here forever. This was my home. I wasn't going to be chased out of my own home by what? A ghost? A demon? Myself? Taking a deep breath, I walked back to the bedroom. I opened the door. It was still there. It had moved. It wasn't standing in the middle of the room anymore. It was sitting on the edge of its bed in the exact same position I was in just a few minutes ago when I was on my laptop. It was uncanny. It just sat there, hands on its knees, looking right at me. I decided to try something. An experiment. I walked over to my nightstand and placed the glass of water down. The small thud of glass on wood was a solid, comforting sound. I sat on the edge of my bed, mimicking its pose. We were mirror images again, both sitting, both staring. I picked up my laptop from the floor where I'd dropped it and put it on my lap. I pretended to type. My fingers tapped meaningless letters. All the while, I watched it out of the corner of my eye. And that's when I saw it. The break. I was looking down at my screen. A faint blue light lit my face. But in the mirror, it wasn't looking down. It wasn't looking at a phantom laptop. Its head was angled slightly to its right. Its eyes were fixed on the glass of water on its nightstand, the reflected glass. My heart skipped a beat. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, snaked up my spine. I stopped typing. I slowly lifted my head and stared directly at it. Its eyes didn't move. They were locked onto the glass and its world. It was a subtle, terrifying shift. The perfect mimicry was broken again. This wasn't a reflection. This was a being with its own focus, its own intentions. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't look away. I was pinned by its gaze, even though it wasn't looking at me. I watched its reflection, watched as, with a terrible, deliberate slowness, it began to move. Its right arm lifted. Not fast, not with anger. It was a smooth, calculated motion. The arm extended out, its hand open. It reached toward the reflected glass of water. My mind was screaming, "Look away! Don't watch this! Get up! Run!" I couldn't move. I was frozen to the bed. My body was an anchor of pure fear. I watched its fingers, my fingers, get closer and closer to the smooth, curved surface of the glass in its world. The space between its fingertips and the glass vanished. It touched it. Then it pushed. The reflected glass tilted. It teetered on its base for a sickening second, and then it fell. It tumbled over, spilling its contents. I saw the imagined water, a silent, silver splash, spread across the surface of the reflected nightstand. It dripped onto the floor of the world behind the glass. A dark, wet patch began to form on the phantom hardwood. A breath I didn't know I was holding escaped my lungs in a ragged gasp. I looked at my nightstand. My glass of water was still there, untouched, upright. The water inside was perfectly still. Not a ripple. Relief hit me so hard it felt like a physical blow. It was a trick. Just a psychological trick. A horror movie gag. It was showing me what it could do, or what it wanted to do, but it couldn't actually affect my world. The throne chair proved it. This proved it too. It was trapped in there, in its silent, watery world. The unbreakable barrier was still in place. It was trying to break me mentally. That's all this was. Fear was its only weapon. If I wasn't afraid, it had nothing. I almost laughed. The tension drained out of me, leaving me weak and shaky, but the terror was receding. I had a rule now. A solid fact. They can't touch anything out here. I broke eye contact for the first time. I looked away from the mirror, a small act of defiance. I looked at the floor, at my discarded hoodie. I was going to get dressed. I was going to turn on all the lights. I was going to take my goddamn apartment back. I bent over, my hand reaching for the soft fabric of the hoodie. I was in control. Crash! The sound was an explosion of glass and water. It was real. It was loud. It was right behind me. I went rigid. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't a sound from the mirror world. It was here, in my room. Slowly, I straightened up and turned my head. The space on my nightstand, where the glass of water had been sitting, was empty. My eyes followed the sound down to the floor. There it was. A puddle of real water seeping into the floorboards. And scattered in the middle of it were the glittering, sharp shards of my glass. It hadn't just tipped over. It had been thrown. It had shattered. But I hadn't touched it. I was across the goddamn room. The air left my lungs. The rules weren't real. There were no rules. My head snapped up. My eyes flying to the mirror, to the thing sitting on the bed. I expected to see it smiling again, that horrible, wide, predator's smile. But it wasn't smiling. It wasn't even sitting anymore. It was on its feet. It stood there, looking down at the phantom mess of spilled water on its side of the glass. It gave the puddle a short, uninterested glance, as if it were a minor inconvenience it had already forgotten about. Then it turned. It turned its back to me. It started walking. Calmly. With purpose. It walked past its bed, its steps silent but heavy with intent. It was walking toward the open doorway of its bedroom. It was leaving the room. The reality of that image slammed into me. It wasn't just a thing trapped in a frame. Behind that glass wasn't a reverse chamber. It was a place. A whole other apartment. A whole other world. And now that it knew it could reach out of its and into mine, it was going somewhere. I watched, frozen in a new kind of horror, as my own back, my own shoulders, crossed the threshold of the mirror doorway and disappeared from view. The bedroom door was open. It was leaving. It had left. The thought was a flat, dead thing in my mind. There was no room for panic anymore. Panic was a luxury. This was something else. A final, cold acceptance of a reality that had no rules. The game wasn't about reflections. It was about replacement. My limbs were lead. I couldn't get up. I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty doorway in the mirror, which perfectly framed the empty doorway of my actual room. It was gone. Out there. Somewhere in my apartment. Where? Living room? The kitchen? Was it standing behind the shower curtain in the bathroom, waiting? No sleep. Not in here. Never in here again. The decision was a spark in a void. It was enough. I forced myself to my feet. Every muscle screamed. I didn't look at the mirror. I looked at the floor. At the wall. At the ceiling. Anywhere but the glass. I grabbed the pillow from my bed. I ripped the comforter off, dragging it behind me like a dead weight. I stumbled out of the bedroom, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want to see my reflection in the dark windows. I didn't want to see what else might be reflected with me. The living room felt vast and full of shadows. I threw the comforter and pillow onto the floor as far from the bedroom door as possible. It wasn't enough. It could just walk out. It could just come for me. My eyes landed on the tall, cheap bookshelf I'd had since college. It was particle board, but it was heavy, loaded with paperbacks I never read. It was a solid, stupid object in a world that had ceased to be solid. It was an idea, a bad one, but it was all I had. I lunged at it. My hands grabbed the sides, fingers digging into the fake wood grain. I grunted, putting my back into it. The thing barely budged, its legs scraping against the hardwood floor with a protesting groan. I wasn't strong. I was a guy who sat at a desk all day. But fear is a hell of a drug. I heaved again. The shelf tilted, books tumbling to the floor with dull thuds. I didn't care. I shoved, my feet slipping, my breath coming in ragged bursts of hot air. Inch by inch, I dragged and pushed the heavy bastard across the living room carpet, leaving a trail of displaced books in my wake. I slammed it against the bedroom door. The frame shuddered. It wasn't a lock. It wasn't a barricade. It was just a heavy piece of furniture. A monument to my own terror. But it covered the door. It blocked the way. I stood back, panting, slick with sweat. My fortress. It was pathetic. But it was something. I collapsed onto the comforter on the floor, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. I wouldn't sleep. I couldn't. I would just lie here and listen. But the night was a deep, silent well. No sounds came from the bedroom, no creaks, no footsteps. The silence was its own kind of pressure, pushing down on me. My exhaustion was a physical enemy, pulling at my eyelids. Just for a minute. Just rest your eyes. The thought was a siren's song. And despite every instinct screaming at me, I lost the battle. I fell into a shallow, dreamless blackness. I woke up with a jolt. The apartment was still dark, but a faint gray light was seeping through the edges of the blinds. Morning was coming. I'd slept. I'd actually slept. My bladder was screaming. A dull, painful pressure that overrode everything else. I had to go. The bathroom. The thought sent a fresh spike of ice through my veins. To get to the bathroom, I had to walk down the short hallway. The hallway with the other mirror. A small, circular one my mom had given me as a housewarming gift. A decorative thing. Harmless. Until now. I told myself not to be an idiot. I had to go. It was a physical need. I stood up, my joints cracking. My eyes shot to the bookshelf. It hadn't moved. It was still pressed tight against the bedroom door. Safe. I was being stupid. The problem was the big mirror. The one in the bedroom. Not this little one. I took the first step into the hall. The floorboards were cold under my bare feet. I kept my eyes fixed on the bathroom door at the end of the hall. Don't look to the side. Just walk. Straight ahead. 3 more steps. My head was a battlefield. One half screaming to run, piss in a bottle, do anything but walk past that mirror. The other half, the rational part that was quickly losing ground, told me I was being a child. It's a piece of glass. 2 more steps. I was almost there. I could see the metallic gleam of the doorknob. I was parallel with it now. The mirror was just there, in my peripheral vision. A dark circle on the wall. I didn't turn my head. I didn't look. I swear to God I didn't look. But you don't have to look. Sometimes you just see. It was a flicker, a trick of the low light. My brain registered it before I could stop it. My reflection. Me, in my wrinkled t-shirt, hair a mess from sleeping on the floor. But there was something else. Something wrong with the picture. Right behind me. In the reflection. A shape. It wasn't a person. It was just dark. Taller than me. A column of pure black that seemed to drink the gray morning light. No face. No clothes. Just a silhouette of a man, standing so close to my reflection's back that they were almost touching. Its presence made the image of me look small and fragile. My heart didn't just skip a beat. It stopped. It fucking stopped cold in my chest. I froze, one foot hovering off the floor. I could feel the blood drain from my face. My breath was trapped in my lungs, a solid block of ice. This wasn't the bedroom. This wasn't the cursed object. This was the hall. It was out. It was in the apartment with me. The bookshelf meant nothing. The locked front door meant nothing. It was here. My brain was a storm of pure, white-hot static. Every instinct, every primal cell in my body screamed one word. Behind you. With a strangled gasp that was more air than sound, I threw myself around. A single, violent spin, my body coiling and uncoiling like a broken spring. I expected to crash into it. I expected a hand on my throat. I expected to see that column of blackness, to feel a cold that wasn't just in my mind. The hallway was empty. Completely, utterly. Empty. Just the pale wall, the hardwood floor, the closed door to a closet. Nothing. Not a shadow out of place. The silence rushed back in, deafening. I stood there. Chest heaving, gulping in air that felt too thin to breathe. My eyes darted everywhere, scanning for any movement, any trick of the light. Nothing. Was I going crazy? Did I finally just break? Was I hallucinating? The relief was so intense it was painful, a wave of nausea rolling through me. A dream. A waking nightmare. I'd scared myself so bad I was seeing things. It had to be. My heart was still trying to hammer its way out of my chest, but the knot of ice in my stomach began to loosen. I had to calm down. I leaned against the wall, my legs shaking too badly to hold me up. I took one deep breath, then another. I had to be sure. Slowly, so slowly, my muscles screaming in protest, I turned my head back toward the mirror. I had to see it one more time. I had to prove to myself that there was nothing there. That it was just my reflection. My eyes found the dark circular frame. The shadow was gone. It was just me. My reflection stared back, my face pale and gaunt in the dim light, eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked like I was a stranger. I was alone in the reflection. I sagged against the wall, a weak, broken laugh escaping my lips. It was nothing. It was all in my head. And then I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound. It was low and heavy. A deep, vibrating groan. The sound of wood scraping against wood. My blood ran cold again. The sound was coming from the living room. From behind me. Scrap. It was slow, deliberate. A sound that required force. A sound that required weight. I knew that sound. It was the sound of the bookshelf, the one I had pushed against the bedroom door. Someone was pushing it back. I couldn't move. I stood frozen in the hallway, my back to the sound, my eyes locked on my own terrified reflection in the small, decorative mirror. I was a statue carved from fear. I could only listen. Scrapped. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was a heavy, waiting silence, an indrawn breath. Then came the final sound. A small sound, but it was the loudest thing I had ever heard in my life. It cut through the silence like a gunshot. Click! The sound of a bedroom door latch. Disengaging. The sound of a door being opened. My body was a thing made of stone. The click from the living room had been the chisel freezing me in place. Locked. Useless. My mind, however, was a wildfire. It raced ahead, painting pictures I didn't want to see. A shape detaching itself from the dark, its hand on the doorknob. The door swinging inward. The empty space where the bookshelf used to be. It was open. The way was open. The bathroom. It was the only room with a lock. That one thought, that single, desperate idea, broke the spell. My limbs came back to life, but they weren't mine. They belonged to some panicked animal. I didn't run. I scrambled, my bare feet slapping against the cold hardwood of the hall, a wet, ugly sound. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I reached the bathroom, my hand fumbling for the knob, fingers slick with a sweat that had nothing to do with heat. The door swung open, and I threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. The noise cracked through the apartment. My shaking hand found the small metal turn lock on the knob. It was cheap. Flimsy. A child could break it. I twisted it. It made a pathetic little snick. My fortress. I pressed my ear against the wood of the door, every nerve ending screaming. My breath was a roaring engine in my own head. I tried to hold it, to make myself a part of the silence, to listen. What was I listening for? Footsteps? Breathing? The rasp of something heavy being dragged across the floor? Nothing. The silence that answered was worse than any sound. It was an active, watching silence. It knew I was in here. It knew I was terrified. It was waiting. My eyes darted around the small, sterile room, the white sink, the toilet, the shower curtain with its stupid faded blue fish. A room of total, boring normalcy. It felt like a stage set. A lie. My gaze fell on the mop propped in the corner between the toilet and the wall. A long wooden handle, a dirty yarn head. It was a weapon. It was pathetic. It was all I had. I crept over and grabbed it, my fingers wrapping tight around the smooth, worn wood. I held it like a spear, pointing the grimy end at the door. I was a caveman in a cage, waiting for the tiger. I stood there for a minute, 2 minutes, an eternity. The only sound was the frantic, painful thudding of my own heart. Then I heard it. A creak. It was so soft I thought I'd imagined it. A floorboard in the living room, groaning under a weight that wasn't mine. My entire body went rigid. The mop handle felt slippery in my hands. Creak. There it was again, closer this time, near the start of the hallway. It was slow, cautious. It wasn't rushing. It didn't need to. It knew I was trapped. It was exploring its new space. My space? My mind was a loop of pure, white noise. It's in the hall. It's in the hall. It's coming. My bladder ached. A sharp, insistent pressure. My whole life had been reduced to a locked door, a dirty mop, and the fall. Sound of slow, deliberate footsteps getting closer. I backed away from the door, step by silent step, until my back hit the cold tiles of the shower wall. I held the mop out in front of me, its handle trembling in time with my arms. I watched the doorknob. I stared at it, willing it not to turn. The footsteps stopped. Right outside the door. I held my breath. My lungs burned. The silence stretched, pulled thin and tight like a rubber band. Any second now. A knock. The rattle of the knob. The sound of the cheap lock breaking. Nothing happened. The silence just kept going. It deepened. A full minute passed. Then another. The pressure in my chest was unbearable. I had to breathe. I let out the air in my lungs in a shaky, silent stream. Did it leave? Did it get bored? Or was it just standing there, playing a game? I couldn't stay in here. I couldn't stand in this little white box and wait for it to decide what happened next. The not knowing was a poison. I had to see. I had to know what was on the other side of that door. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff. Slowly, so slowly, I moved back towards the door. My movements were stiff, robotic. I laid the mop down on the floor without a sound. It was useless anyway. My hand, slick and shaking, reached for the lock. I paused, my fingers hovering over the metal. This was it. The moment I opened this door, there was no going back. I twisted the lock. The snick was a cannon shot in the quiet room. I braced myself, waited for the crash, for the door to fly inward. Still nothing. My hand went to the knob. I turned it with the care of a bomb disposal expert, centimeter by centimeter. The latch clicked back. I pulled the door inward, just a crack. A sliver of the dim hallway. I put my eye to the gap. The hallway was empty. My eyes followed it down to the living room. From my angle, I could see the couch, the dark screen of the TV, and the bookshelf. It was shoved away from the bedroom door, skewed at an ugly angle, a trail of fallen paperbacks scattered behind it like bodies. The sight was a jolt of ice and fire. It was real. I hadn't dreamed it. I wasn't crazy. Something had pushed that heavy bastard back. Something was in my apartment. But where was it now? My heart was a jackhammer, but a strange clarity was cutting through the fear. I had to find it. I had to see it. It was like probing a bad tooth with your tongue. It hurt, but you couldn't stop. I opened the bathroom door wider and slipped out, my back pressed hard against the wall. The air in the apartment felt heavy, used. I moved down the hallway, my feet making no sound on the floorboards. My eyes scanned every shadow, every corner. The living room was empty. The small kitchen alcove was empty. The windows were dark, reflecting nothing but the faint gray light of the coming dawn. That left one place. The bedroom. I stood at the entrance to the hall, looking toward the open bedroom door. The bookshelf I had used as a barricade now looked like a piece of abandoned, useless junk, a monument to my own failure. The doorway was a black rectangle, a mouth waiting to swallow me. I took a step, then another. My entire world had shrunk to the 20 feet between me and that door. My bare feet padded softly on the rug. The silence was absolute. I reached the doorway and stopped, my hand bracing against the frame. I peered inside. The bed was a mess, just as I'd left it. The comforter and pillow I'd taken were still gone, of course. My closet door was slightly ajar. The window was dark. Everything looked normal. Wrong, but normal. And then my eyes found the mirror. The tall, standing mirror against the far wall. And I saw him. Me. My reflection. It was standing just inside the room, in the exact same posture as me, one hand on the doorframe, leaning in. Cautious. My t-shirt was wrinkled, my hair was a wreck. Its face, my face, was a mask of strained exhaustion and fear. It was a perfect copy. A wave of strange, nonsensical relief washed over me. It felt so powerful, it almost made my knees buckle. It was just the mirror. The thing in the hall, the noises. Maybe it was all in my head after all. Maybe I'd finally cracked. The bookshelf? I was tired. I could have imagined the sound. Maybe I didn't push it as hard as I thought. My mind was offering me a ladder out of the pit, and I was desperate enough to take it. I stared at my reflection, and it stared back. We were two statues in a silent standoff. I took a deep breath, trying to slow my heart. He took a deep breath. I blinked. He blinked. It was just glass. just light and angles. It was going to be okay. I was just losing my mind. I let out a weak, shaky laugh. The reflection didn't laugh. It didn't move, it didn't do anything. It just watched me. And then, its face changed. The fear in its eyes, in my eyes, vanished. It was replaced by something else. Something cold and flat and full of rage. Before my brain could even process the shift, it moved. It wasn't a flicker. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a violent, sudden explosion of action. The reflection threw itself forward, both of its hands raised, and slammed them against the surface of the mirror from the inside. Bam! The sound was not an echo. It was a physical, concussive blast that hit me in the chest. It was the sound of flesh and bone hitting thick glass with all the force of a car crash. The entire mirror, a heavy thing of wood and silvered glass, shuddered in its frame. The wood groaned under the impact. It wasn't a reflection anymore. It was a prisoner, and it was trying to break out. My mind went completely blank. All I could do was stare, paralyzed, as the thing wearing my face reeled back. Its face was a snarl of pure hatred, an expression I had never made in my life. It raised its hands again. Bam! Another deafening crack of impact. The mirror shook so hard, I was sure the glass would shatter and spray across the room. I saw tiny fissures like spiderwebs appear in my reflection's vision, but the surface in my room remained perfectly smooth. It was breaking its world, not mine. It pulled back for a third time, its whole body coiling like a spring. Bam! A final, sickening blow that seemed to echo in the bones of the building. The sound rang in my ears, loud and sharp and horribly real. Then it stopped. The thing in the mirror took a staggered step back, its chest heaving. It was breathing hard, its mouth open. It slowly, deliberately raised its hands, turning the palms toward the glass, toward me. They were a ruin. Deep, ragged cuts crisscrossed the palms and fingers. Blood, dark and thick, was welling up from the wounds. It wasn't just a smear. It was flowing, dripping down its wrists, smearing the inside of the glass with long, wet, red streaks. It left perfect, bloody handprints on its side of the barrier, a prisoner marking its cell wall. The sight was so horrific, so impossible, that it broke me out of my trance. A strangled gasp escaped my lips. My eyes shot down to my own hands. I held them up in the dim light, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. They were clean, perfectly, utterly clean. Not a scratch, not a bruise, not a single drop of blood. The skin was pale, the knuckles white from clenching, but they were whole. They were mine. I stared at them, then back at the bloody, mangled hands in the mirror, then back at my own, clean, bloody, clean, bloody. The contradiction was a physical blow, a paradox that my brain simply could not compute. It was impossible. It couldn't be real. And then I felt it. It wasn't a sharp pain. It was a low, dull, throbbing ache that started deep in my palms. A phantom sting. I looked at my perfectly unmarked skin, but I could feel the cuts. I could feel the hot, wet sting as if the wounds were my own. A burning, invisible agony began to radiate up my arms. The connection wasn't just visual anymore. It was physical. A scar I could feel but couldn't see. I looked up one last time, my eyes wide with a new, deeper kind of terror. The thing in the mirror was still watching me. It slowly curled its bloody fingers into a fist, and through the glass, through the impossible distance between our worlds, I felt my own hands tighten in perfect, agonizing synchrony. I stumbled back, my hands flying open as if ejecting the phantom pain. The connection snapped. The throbbing in my palms faded to a dull, ghost-like ache, a memory of an injury I didn't have. My own hands, held up in the gray pre-dawn light, were pale and clean. In the mirror, the bloody ruin of my reflection's hands remained, a testament to an attack that had happened and hadn't happened all at once. It lowered its mangled fists, the rage on its face cooling into something else, something worse, a look of cold, calculating appraisal. It had tested the barrier. It had found a new way to hurt me. Panic was a physical thing, a concrete block in my throat. I had to get out. Not just out of the room, but out of the apartment. I turned and fled, my bare feet slapping on the floorboards, not even looking back at the mirror. I didn't need to. I could feel its gaze on my back, a tangible pressure. I scrambled through the wreckage of the living room, past the displaced bookshelf and the scattered paperbacks. My keys. I needed my keys. My hand swept across the small table by the door, finding nothing but dust and old mail. My pockets. Empty. My mind raced. Where did I leave them? The kitchen counter? The bedroom? The thought of going back into that bedroom made my stomach clench. No, I couldn't run. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow, stopping me cold with my hand on the front doorknob. Where would I go? Out into the hallway in my shorts and t-shirt looking like a madman? Banging on a neighbor's door at 5 a.m? What would I even say? The man in my mirror is trying to kill me? They'd call the cops, and the cops would call a different kind of doctor. I'd be the crazy guy, the guy who trashed his own apartment in a paranoid fit. And the thing in the glass, would still be here, waiting. The fear didn't go away, but something new and ugly curdled alongside it, a desperate, sharp-edged curiosity. The part of the brain that makes you watch crash videos, that forces you to look at the thing you're most afraid of. I wasn't having a breakdown. This was real. The smashed hands, the phantom pain, the pushed bookshelf. It was real, and if it was real, it could be understood. It could be documented. I needed proof, not for anyone else, for me, to hold on to the shred of sanity I had left. My eyes scanned the apartment, looking for a weapon, for a tool, for anything. They landed on the closet door in the hall. Behind it, in a dusty cardboard box, was my old life. College junk. Old textbooks. And a camcorder. A clunky, outdated Sony Handycam I hadn't touched in a decade. It was perfect. My movements became deliberate. The panic was still there, a frantic humming beneath my skin, but now it had a purpose. I pulled the closet door open, found the box, and tore it apart. There it was. I clicked the battery into place, prayed it had a charge. A small green light blinked to life. I found a tape, a blank one still in its plastic, and shoved it into the side of the camera. The machine whirred, accepting it with a satisfying click-clack. I needed a steady shot. The tripod was in the same box. I pulled out the collapsible metal legs, extending them with shaking hands. The whole setup felt archaic, like I was some low-budget ghost hunter from a bad reality show. I didn't care. I carried the rig into the bedroom. I didn't look at the mirror. I couldn't. I kept my eyes fixed on the tripod, on the camera, on the mechanics of the task. I set it up in the corner of the room, far enough away to capture the entire standing mirror in the frame. I fiddled with the settings, my thumb clumsy on the tiny buttons. I angled it, zoomed in just enough, and checked the small flip-out LCD screen. The view was perfect. The mirror dominated the frame, reflecting the rumpled bed, the closet door, the entrance to the room. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I took a deep breath, the air thin and sharp in my lungs. I looked at the little red button. I pressed record. A small red dot appeared in the top right corner of the screen. REC. The numbers of a timer started climbing. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 1 second. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 2 seconds. It was on. It was watching. I didn't want to be in the shot. I didn't want it to see me. I retreated, backing out of the bedroom, and pulling the door almost completely shut, leaving just a crack. I sat on the floor in the hallway, my back against the wall, my knees pulled up to my chest. From this angle, through the crack, I could see the mirror, and it could see an empty room. I waited. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the frantic, painful thudding of my own heart. The gray light of dawn was getting stronger, bleeding through the windows, turning the shadows in my apartment from black to a watery gray. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I stared at the mirror. Nothing. It was just a mirror again. A piece of furniture, reflecting an empty, silent room. Doubt began to creep in. A cold, insidious weed. Was the pain a psychosomatic trick of a terrified mind? Did I imagine the force of the blows? Was I just a guy who was losing his grip, setting up a camera to film a piece of glass? The absurdity of it all was about to break me when I remembered the LCD screen. Slowly, I got to my feet. I crept back to the bedroom door and peered through the crack, not at the mirror itself, but at the tripod in the corner. I could just see the edge of the little screen, its pale light glowing in the dim room. I needed a better view. I pushed the door open a few more inches, my body tense. I got down on my hands and knees, crawling silently into a corner of the bedroom that was out of the mirror's line of sight, a blind spot. Now I could see the camcorder screen clearly. It showed what I saw. An empty room, reflected. The timer read 0 hours, 17 minutes, and 42 seconds. I watched both. My eyes flicked from the real mirror to the tiny screen. They were identical. Perfect copies. I shifted my weight. Nothing happened in the mirror. I wasn't in its view. I held my breath. And then it happened. On the screen, the reflection of the empty doorway, the one leading out to the hall where I had been sitting, darkened. And my reflection stepped into the frame. My blood ran cold. It was impossible. I was crouched here, in the corner. I wasn't in the doorway, but on the camera screen, I was. He was standing there in the exact spot I just left. Same wrinkled t-shirt. Same terrified expression. He just stood there, staring at his own reflection. A reflection of a reflection. My mind screeched to a halt, trying to process the paradox. I was watching a recording of something that wasn't happening. Then, the me on the screen did something I was not doing. He raised his head slowly. His eyes, on the tiny LCD screen, moved from his own mirrored image and stared directly forward. He was looking at the camera. He was looking at me. And then he winked. A single, deliberate, slow-motion wink. The corner of his mouth curled up into a smirk. It was a gesture of utter confidence, of ownership. It was a message, sent through a lens and a screen, directly to me. I see you. I know you're watching. A strangled noise escaped my throat. I scrambled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. My brain felt like it was splitting in two. I looked from the screen to the real mirror. The real mirror was still empty. It showed no reflection in the doorway. Nothing. The event only existed on the tape, I had to be sure. My hand, trembling violently, reached out and grabbed the camera. I didn't care about being seen anymore. I jabbed the rewind button. The tape whirred backward. I hit play. There it was. Undeniable. The flicker of the wink. The smirk. It was real. It was recorded. My proof. But the relief of having proof was instantly swallowed by a new, suffocating terror. This wasn't some mindless entity. It was intelligent. It was playing a game, and the board was my apartment, my technology, my sanity. I wasn't the scientist, Chat Sung. I was the rat in its maze. I looked up from the screen, my eyes locking with the real mirror across the room. And he was there now. My reflection. Standing in the middle of the room, exactly where it should be, it was staring right at me. The look of fear was gone. The rage was gone. All that was left was the smirk I had just seen on the tape. A triumphant, mocking smile that was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. It knew I had seen the tape. It knew that I knew. The game had changed. And then the world ended. Click. The light on the camcorder died. The LCD screen went black. The lamp in the corner of the room went out. The digital clock on the cable box vanished. The hum of the fridge stopped. The entire apartment plunged into an aggressive, deafening darkness. The power was out. I was frozen in my corner, suddenly blind. The only light was a faint, hazy glow from the streetlights outside, filtering through the window, barely enough to turn the absolute black into a deep, threatening gray. I couldn't see the mirror anymore. I couldn't see anything. My ears strained, trying to pick up any sound over the blood roaring in my head. Slap! The sound was soft, unmistakable. A bare foot on the hardwood floor. It came from the area where the mirror was. My lungs seized. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't in the glass anymore. The power cut. The barrier was down. It was in the room with me. Slap. Closer. It was moving away from the wall. into the center of the room. It was slow, deliberate. There was no rush. It knew I was here. It knew I was trapped. It knew I was blind. My mind was a loop of pure, white noise terror. It's out. It's in here. It's in the room. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if that would somehow make me more invisible. A useless, childish instinct. Slap! It was only a few feet away now. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe. My entire universe had shrunk to this patch of floor in a dark corner, a hunted animal waiting for the predator to find it. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, alive. I could feel its presence in the air, a drop in temperature, a static charge against my skin. It was right in front of me, standing over me. I could feel it looking down. A stream of icy air washed over my face, carrying a faint, wrong smell, like damp soil and ozone after a lightning strike. It was the air displaced by something moving. It was its breath. I waited for the touch, for the pain, for the end. Seconds stretched into lifetimes. The pressure in my chest was unbearable. Then, just as suddenly as they died, the lights flickered back on. BZZT. Click. The lamp sputtered. The camcorder's green light blinked. The room was flooded with light. It was empty. I was alone, staring at an empty space in the middle of the floor. The mirror against the wall showed only me, a pathetic, trembling heap in the corner. My reflection's face was a mask of pure terror. It was a perfect, terrified copy. A hysterical sob of relief broke from my lips. It was gone. The light had scared it away. It was over. My eyes, wet with tears, drifted to the camcorder, still standing on its tripod. The red light was on. It had been recording the entire time. Through the blackout, and on the front of the camera, on the curved black glass of the lens itself, was a mark. It wasn't a smudge, it wasn't a crack, it was a fingerprint, dark red, glistening, a perfect world pattern of ridges and loops pressed firmly into the glass as if to make a permanent mark. It came from a hand I had seen bleed, but a hand that was not my own. It had crossed over, it had walked through my room, and it had put its finger on the eye I was using to watch it. A possessive, final gesture. A signature. The light didn't bring safety. It brought clarity. And clarity was worse. I was sprawled in the corner of my bedroom, a heap of sweat and trembling limbs. The lamp was on. The digital clock on the cable box glowed. 6:17 a.m. The power had been out for less than a minute. An eternity. My eyes were locked on the camcorder. The little red light was still blinking. REC. It had seen everything. It had seen the darkness. It had seen the footsteps. My gaze drifted to the lens. The fingerprint. It was still there, a glistening maroon swirl against the black glass. A mark of trespass. Proof. My proof. I didn't touch it. I didn't dare. It felt like disturbing a grave. It felt sacred in its horror. I stayed on the floor for a long time. The sun climbed, and the gray light outside my window turned to a harsh, unforgiving yellow. The sounds of the city started to wake up. A distant siren, the rumble of a garbage truck. Normal sounds, sounds from a world I wasn't part of anymore. My world was this room, this mirror, this fingerprint. My body ached. My throat was raw. I needed to do something. Get up. Call the cops. Show them the tape. Show them the fingerprint. But the scene from my mind replayed itself. What would I even say? The man in my mirror walked through my room while the power was out? They'd take the tape as evidence, and me as a patient. I pushed myself up, my joints cracking in protest. My legs were shaky. I felt 100 years old. I looked at the mirror. It just showed me. A pale, haggard guy in a wrinkled t-shirt, with wild eyes and hair sticking up in every direction. His face was a mask of terror. A perfect copy. My reflection was mine again. For now. I stumbled out of the bedroom, leaving the camera running. I couldn't bring myself to turn it off. It was my only witness. I went to the kitchen and drank water straight from the tap, gulping it down until my stomach hurt. I leaned against the counter, my head buzzing. The apartment was a wreck. The bookshelf was still on its side. Books were everywhere. It looked like a robbery, but the only thing stolen was my sanity. Then it came. Knock. 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 The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. My whole body seized. Every muscle went rigid. My heart, which had just started to slow, kicked back into a frantic, hammering rhythm. It was here, at the front door. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just listened. The silence stretched. Maybe I'd imagined it. A product of a fried nervous system. Knock. 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 Firmer this time. Insistent. Followed by a voice. A woman's voice. Thin and reedy. "Hello? Young man? Are you in there?" "It's Mrs. Gable from 4B. Mrs. Gable. The old woman from down the hall. I'd seen her maybe twice, getting her mail. I felt a wave of relief so intense it almost buckled my knees. It was a person. A real person. Not him. "Just a minute," I called out. My voice was a broken croak. I cleared my throat, trying to sound normal. It was a joke. Nothing about this was normal. I crept to the door. My hands shook as I reached for the peephole. I put my eye to the cool, warped glass. The hallway was distorted into a fisheye lens. There she was, a small, hunched figure with a cloud of white hair and big, thick glasses that magnified her eyes. She clutched a floral print purse to her chest with both hands. I took a breath and unlocked the door. I pulled it open a few inches. "Hi, can I help you?" She squinted at me, her head tilted. Her magnified eyes scanned my face, my disheveled appearance. A frown formed on her thin lips. "Oh, dear boy, are you all right? I don't mean to pry, but I heard such a commotion last night." "Well, early this morning." My blood ran cold. A commotion? Yes, shouting, and a terrible crash. It sounded like a bookshelf falling over. I was worried. "My bedroom wall is right up against your living room, you see." She pointed a bony finger at the wall. My mind raced. A lie. I needed a lie. A simple, believable lie. "I'm sorry. I had a nightmare. A really bad one. I must have knocked something over when I woke up." It sounded feeble even to my own ears. Mrs. Gable didn't look convinced. Her eyes, huge behind her glasses, drifted past me, into the apartment. She could see the overturned bookshelf from where she stood. She saw the mess. Her expression wasn't accusatory. It was something else. Something I didn't like. Pity. A deep, sorrowful pity. "A nightmare," she repeated slowly, the words hanging in the air. She looked back at me, her gaze heavy. "You know, this apartment, it has an unhappy history, son." The air left my lungs. "What do you mean?" She clutched her purse tighter. It seemed like she was debating whether to continue. The part of me that wanted to live screamed, "Slam the door, tell her to leave, you don't want to know." But I couldn't move. I had to know. "The last young man who lived here," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He had bad dreams, too. An artist, a painter, very sensitive boy." My mouth was dry. I couldn't speak. I just listened. "He got unwell," she continued, choosing her words carefully. "Toward the end. He wouldn't come out. I'd hear him talking to himself through the walls, arguing sometimes. He told me once in the hallway that he wasn't alone in here. He said there was someone else living with him." Her eyes bored into mine. "He said there was a man living in his mirror." The words hit me like a physical force. I stumbled back a step, my hand gripping the edge of the door to keep from falling. It wasn't just me. It had a history. A pattern. I wasn't the first. He told the landlord. He told the other tenants. No one believed him, of course, Mrs. Gable said, her face a mask of old sadness. They thought he was on drugs, or that his depression was just getting the better of him. They found him a week later, in the bedroom. She didn't have to say how. I knew. The knowledge settled in my bones, a block of ice. This thing wasn't just a phantom. It was a killer. It drove people mad, and then it watched them die. The warning hadn't just come too late. It was an epitaph. My epitaph. A desperate, final thought clawed its way through my terror. The object. It was the object. The mirror itself was the source. If I could get rid of it, maybe I could break the cycle. Maybe I could escape the artist's fate. Mrs. Gable was turning to leave. Her duty was done. She had delivered her grim little warning. "Wait," I choked out. The word was torn from my throat. She stopped and looked back at me over her shoulder. "The mirror," I said, my voice shaking. "His mirror, is it?" Mrs. Gable turned fully around. Her expression had changed. The pity was gone. The sadness was gone. Her face was blank. Cold. Her magnified eyes were just wide, confused circles. "What mirror?" she asked. The question didn't register at first. My brain was too slow, too clogged with fear. "The one in the bedroom," I pushed. "The big one. The standing one. Did they leave it here?" She took a small step back from me. A flicker of a new emotion crossed her face. Not pity. Fear. She was afraid of me. "Young man, I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice suddenly sharp and defensive. "The landlord had the place cleared out completely after the incident. Steam cleaned the carpets, repainted everything. I saw it myself. It was empty when he gave you the keys." My mind short-circuited. The words made no sense. "No, it was here. It was here when I moved in." Her stare was hard now, unblinking. "No, it wasn't. There was no mirror in this apartment." "Whatever you have in there," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the inside of my apartment, "you brought it here yourself." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned and shuffled quickly down the hall, her footsteps loud in the sudden silence. I stood in the doorway, the world tilting under my feet. "You brought it here yourself." The sentence echoed in my head. A flat, simple statement that bulldozed the foundations of my reality. I closed the door. The click of the latch was deafening. I tried to remember. I tried to remember buying a mirror. I tried to remember the effort of carrying a huge, heavy, wood-framed mirror up 4 flights of stairs. I tried to remember finding a place for it, angling it just so in the bedroom. Nothing. There was a hole in my memory. A perfect, smooth, black hole where that event should have been. I could remember signing the lease. I could remember hauling boxes of books and clothes. I could remember setting up my bed. But the mirror, it was just there, as if it had always been a part of the room. My legs, on their own, carried me back to the bedroom. I stopped in the doorway. The camera was still on its tripod, a faithful, silent sentinel. And across the room, the mirror stood. It looked different now. It wasn't just a haunted object anymore. It wasn't a cursed antique left by a dead man. It was mine. A possession I didn't remember acquiring. A piece of my life that my own mind refused to acknowledge. Had I been sick before I even moved in? Was the artist just a horrifying coincidence? Or was this apartment a magnet for broken minds like mine? Or was it something worse? Did it make me bring it here? Did it burrow into my mind and erase the memory of its own arrival, making itself an irremovable part of my home, of my life? I looked from the mirror to the camera. The bloody fingerprint was still on the lens. The proof. Proof that something had crossed over. But the old woman's words were a new kind of proof. Proof that the entity wasn't just in the mirror, it was in my head too. My hand was still on the doorknob. The wood felt slick with my own sweat. I closed the door. The click of the latch was final. The world spun. Mrs. Gable's words weren't an accusation. They were a verdict. "You brought it here yourself." No. Impossible. I walked back into the center of the living room, my feet unsteady on the floorboards. I tried to make my brain work. To rewind. To play back the memory of moving day. I saw boxes. I saw the U-Haul parked on the street, its hazard lights blinking. I saw myself, slick with sweat, hauling my mattress up the 4 flights of stairs. I remembered the scrape of my desk against the doorframe. I remembered the weight of the boxes labeled books. But the mirror. Nothing. It was a void. A smooth, black, perfect nothing. It was like trying to remember the face of a stranger you passed on the street a year ago. The information wasn't just fuzzy. It wasn't there. My eyes scanned the room. The overturned bookshelf. The scattered paperbacks. And the stack of moving boxes in the corner, the ones I hadn't gotten around to unpacking yet, the ones labeled MISC. An idea, born of pure desperation, sparked in my brain. A receipt. A credit card statement. A scrap of paper. Some proof of purchase. Some evidence that I had, at some point, walked into a store and bought a large, heavy, wood-framed mirror. Anything to prove Mrs. Gable was a confused old woman, and I wasn't losing my mind. I fell to my knees beside the stack of boxes. The cardboard was rough under my frantic fingers. I ripped the packing tape off the top one. Inside, old charging cables, a broken coffee maker, a stack of bills from my last apartment. I threw them out, one by one, nothing. The next box. More junk. A dusty laptop that hadn't been turned on in 5 years. Old college textbooks. A single, forgotten sneaker. My hands were shaking now. A fine tremor that started in my fingers and radiated up my arms. This wasn't a search. This was a scramble for a lifeline. The third box. This one was different. Lighter. I pulled open the flaps. The smell of dust and old paper, the scent of years packed away, hit me. Photo albums. Thick vinyl-bound books, heavy with memories I hadn't looked at in a decade. One was dark blue, another a faded burgundy. I lifted one out. It was heavy. I sat back on my heels, the dusty album on my lap. My search for a receipt was forgotten. This was something else. This was a history. My history. I opened it. The plastic pages crackled. The first photo was of me at a birthday party, maybe 7 or 8 years old. A piece of chocolate cake smeared on my cheek. I turned the page. Me on a bike, no training wheels. A look of terrified pride on my face. Page after page. A life. A normal life. A life before this apartment. Before the fingerprint. Before the thing that wore my face. And then I saw it. It was a family portrait. The kind you get taken at a department store studio. The backdrop was a mottled blue-gray. My dad stood behind us, his hands on my mom's shoulders. My mom was seated, smiling a tired but genuine smile. And standing next to her, one hand on her knee, was me. I must have been about 5. I wore a little plaid shirt and had a gap-toothed grin. My eyes were bright. I remembered the flash of the camera, how it made me see spots for a minute after. It was a picture of a happy family. A normal kid. I didn't know why, but I needed to see it. See it next to him. My legs felt like lead as I pushed myself to my feet. The photo was cool in my hand. I walked out of the living room, down the short hall, and stopped at the threshold of my bedroom. It was waiting. Silent. Patient. The camcorder was still aimed at it, a little red eye in the gloom. The mirror dominated the room, a dark rectangle of glass that seemed to suck the light out of the air. It just showed me. A man standing in a doorway, pale and hollow-eyed, holding a photograph. A perfect copy. I took a breath. It hitched in my throat. I stepped into the room. One step. Then another. The floorboards creaked under my weight. The sound was huge in the silence. I stopped a few feet from the mirror. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I raised the photo. I held it up beside my face, my knuckles white. My gaze flickered from the real photo in my hand to the reflection. The man in the mirror did the same. He held up the reflected photo. Every detail was the same. The plaid shirt. My parents' tired smiles. For a second, there was nothing. Just a man in his reflection, holding up a memory. The relief was so sharp it almost hurt. Maybe it was over. Maybe I'd imagined a connection that wasn't there. Then I looked closer. I stared at the photo in the mirror's hand. At the little boy standing beside his mother. The plaid shirt was the same. The gap-toothed smile was the same. But the eyes were wrong. In my photo, my eyes were a child's eyes. Bright, a little unfocused, innocent. In the reflections photo, the boy's eyes were not a child's eyes. They were ancient. They were flat, cold, and intelligent. They held a deep, chilling awareness. The smile on his face wasn't a smile. It wasn't happiness. It was a baring of teeth, a look of cruel, knowing victory. My blood ran cold. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. It wasn't just mimicking me. It was corrupting my past. It was showing me a version of my own life that was tainted, that was wrong. This wasn't a stranger that latched onto me in this apartment, this thing, this entity. It knew me. It had always known me. I couldn't look away. I was pinned by the image. My eyes were locked on the face of that twisted child in the reflected photograph. The demon child that wore my 5-year-old face. Then it happened. The thing in the picture moved. It wasn't a twitch. It wasn't a trick of the light. The head of the little boy, the two-dimensional image printed on photographic paper a lifetime ago, began to turn. It was slow. Unnatural. The paper didn't crinkle. The ink didn't shift. The head just rotated on its neck. The tiny, evil face turned away from its smiling fake mother. It turned past its fake father. It turned until its cold, ABYSSAL eyes looked past the reflection of my own horrified adult face, past the glass of the mirror. It looked right at me. A scream tore from my throat, raw and broken. My hand flew open. The real photograph fluttered from my numb fingers, tumbling end over end until it landed face down on the wooden floor with a soft slap. I scrambled back, tripping over my own feet, and crashed against the wall. My breath came in ragged, painful sobs. I stared at the mirror. The thing inside was just me again, standing there, looking shocked. Its hand was empty, just like mine. The reflected photograph was gone, because my real one was on the floor. It was a perfect copy once more. A perfect, lying copy. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, knocking the last bit of air out of my body. It wasn't a doppelganger from another dimension trying to get in. It wasn't a ghost tied to the glass. That thing in the picture, that was the real entity. It wasn't something I had just encountered. It had been there all along, a parasite. A passenger, hiding in my own life, in my own memories, looking out at the world through my own eyes. The reflection wasn't a monster trying to be me. The reflection was me. The man in the mirror was the real me, while this thing was piloting my body. Nah, that couldn't be it. The logic scrambled. Was it a part of me? A version of me that had been there since the beginning? That boy with the dead eyes, was that what looked out from behind my face when I wasn't paying attention? Did I carry this darkness inside me my whole life, and only now this mirror was showing it to me? My legs shook too hard to stand. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my head in my hands, the bloody fingerprint on the camera lens, the footsteps in the dark, the voice of the painter, Mrs. Gable's words. You brought it here yourself. Of course I did. It made me. It needed a place where it could finally see itself. Minutes passed. The sound of my own ragged breathing slowly filled the silence. I had to know. I had to see the real photo again. I crawled on my hands and knees across the floor, every movement an agony. My hand trembled as I reached for the small, white rectangle lying face down on the wood. I turned it over. The mottled blue-gray background. My parents. And the little boy. A 5-year-old kid with a gap-toothed grin and bright, innocent eyes. The picture was normal. Just a kid. Just me. But I couldn't unsee it. That other face. My face. Staring out from my own past. It wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was in my head. The photograph was in my hand. Normal. Just a picture. My parents, me, a stupid plaid shirt. The boy's eyes were bright. My eyes. But the other image was burned behind them. The cold, ancient eyes of that thing in the reflected photo. It wasn't in the mirror now. It was in my head. A parasite. A passenger. The thought was a jolt of ice in my veins. My legs were weak. I was on the floor, a puppet with its strings cut. I looked from the normal picture to the mirror. It just showed me. A man on the floor. A mess. No, I would not let this happen. This was a game, some kind of psychological attack. My mind, my apartment, my life. If it wanted a reaction, I wouldn't give it the one it wanted. I would break its script. I pushed myself up. My knees popped. My hands shook, so I balled them into fists. I stood in the center of the room, facing the dark glass. The camcorder's little red light was still on, a single, unblinking witness. Okay. You want to copy me? Copy this. I forced a laugh. It came out like a bark, sharp and ugly. The man in the mirror laughed too. His mouth opened at the same instant. The sound he made was silent, but his shoulders shook with the same forced rhythm. Good. Let's dance. I started to move. Not a real dance, just a series of jerks and twitches. I flapped one arm like a broken wing. I kicked my leg out, high and clumsy, almost losing my balance. I spun in a slow, awkward circle. I was a madman. A clown. Anything to be unpredictable. Anything to prove to myself that it was just a reflection, a stupid slave to my movements. For a moment, it worked. My brain relaxed a little. See? I move, it moves. Simple physics. Nothing to be afraid of. I am in control. But the feeling didn't last. I looked closer. I was stumbling. My movements were ugly, born of desperation. The man in the mirror, he was not. When I flapped my arm, his movement was sharp, precise. When I kicked my leg out and wobbled, he kicked with the fluid grace of a martial artist, his balance perfect. My clumsy spin was, in the mirror, a controlled, elegant pirouette. It wasn't just copying me. It was improving me. It was correcting my flaws. It was a silent, effortless demonstration of everything I was not. Graceful, confident, perfect. A hot flush of shame and anger rose in my throat. It was mocking me. It was showing me a better version of myself, a version I could never be, and it was doing it inside my own skin. No, I whispered, the sound swallowed by the room. The fight wasn't over. I would push harder. I would become so chaotic, so broken in my motions, that no amount of grace could fix it. I threw myself into it. I jumped up and down, my feet pounding on the old wood floor. I made faces. I crossed my eyes, puffed out my cheeks, stuck out my tongue. I hunched my shoulders and walked like a gorilla. I screeched, a high, thin sound of pure frustration. The thing in the mirror was a perfect, silent echo. It jumped, but landed softly, without sound. Its face twisted into the same grotesque masks, but on its features, they looked less like madness and more like performance art. Every ugly, spastic movement I made was returned to me as something deliberate, something beautiful, something that made my own efforts look pathetic. I was the draft. It was the final version. My lungs burned. My legs ached. Sweat dripped down my temples and stung my eyes. I couldn't keep it up. I finally stopped, bent over, my hands on my knees, sucking in huge, ragged gulps of air. The room was silent, except for my own desperate breathing. I straightened up slowly. My whole body trembled with exhaustion. I looked at the mirror. The man inside stood perfectly straight. He wasn't breathing hard. His hair was neat. His expression was calm. He looked rested. He looked superior. He had won. He had broken me without moving a muscle on his own. The game was over. I had lost. I just stared. What else was there to do? I had tried to outwit it, and it had humiliated me. I had tried to fight, and it had danced. Now there was only the silence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a loud, frantic drum in the quiet room. Then, it moved. Not in reaction to me. It was its own choice. Slowly, deliberately, the reflection raised its right hand. The movement was smooth, without tremor. I watched, frozen, as the hand came up to its chest, palm facing forward. It was my hand. I saw the mole on the back of the wrist. I saw the faint white line of the scar on my index finger. It placed its palm flat against the inner surface of the mirror. The gesture was quiet, simple, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. Because it wasn't a reflection anymore. It was an action, an intention. My own body reacted without my permission. I took a step back. The floorboard under my foot let out a loud groan. The sound was a gunshot in the stillness. The thing in the mirror didn't flinch. Its eyes were locked on mine. Its hands stayed pressed against the glass. It was waiting. Or maybe it was showing me something. Showing me the barrier between us. and showing me how meaningless it was. I couldn't look away from its hand. It was so close. A sheet of glass, maybe a quarter-inch thick, was all that separated my world from its. That hand, which should have been just light and silver nitrate, looked solid. It looked real. I could almost feel the pressure of it, a cold spot radiating out from the glass. My breath hitched. My throat was dry. I wanted to run, to turn around and burst out of this room, out of this apartment, and never look back. But I couldn't move. My feet were nailed to the floor. All I could do was watch that hand, pressed against the glass from the other side. The silence grew. It became heavy. It filled my ears, pushed on my eardrums. I could feel my own pulse in my neck. Thump, 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 thump. A panicked bird trapped in a cage of bone. The reflection's eyes narrowed. Just a fraction. It was a look of concentration. A look of effort. And then it pushed. I didn't hear a sound. There was no crack, no splintering of glass. The surface of the mirror simply gave way. It bent inward. It stretched like black silk. It rippled like the surface of a pool of oil. The reflection's fingers, my fingers, sank into the glass. They disappeared up to the knuckles, creating gentle, silent eddies in the impossible surface. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. It was a dream, a hallucination. It had to be. Glass does not bend. The hand pushed deeper. The wrist slid through the shimmering black membrane. Then the forearm. It was coming through. The barrier was broken. It was not a mirror. It was a doorway. The hand was in my room. It hung in the air just a few feet from my face. It was pale, the skin almost translucent. The fingers were long and still. It was a real, physical thing, occupying the space where only air should have been. It dripped, not with water, but with droplets of shadow that vanished before they hit the floor. The air around it turned cold, a deep, biting cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the cold of a place where the sun had never shone. My throat was locked. I tried to scream, but only a choked gasp came out. The fingers in the air twitched. They curled slowly into a fist, then uncurled, one by one, a demonstration of fine motor control. It was real. It was here. It had crossed over. The thing that wore my face, that had been a passenger in my memories, was now reaching out of its prison. It was reaching for me. My sanity snapped. A scream finally tore out of my lungs. It was not a human sound. It was raw animal terror, a sound ripped from the deepest part of my brain. I fell backward, scrambling away, my hands and feet slipping on the wooden floor. I was a crab scuttling away from a predator, my only thought to get away, to put distance between me and that impossible pale hand hanging in the air. My back slammed into the wall with a hard, painful thud. The moment my scream erupted, the hand was gone. It retracted in a blur, pulling back through the rippling surface of the mirror so fast I almost missed it. The black membrane snapped back. The ripples vanished. The mirror was just a mirror again. Flat. Solid. Reflecting me, a crumpled, terrified heap against the far wall. It was perfect. Untouched. As if nothing had ever happened. I stayed there, gasping for air, my heart threatening to explode in my chest. Did I imagine it? Was it a waking nightmare brought on by fear and exhaustion? No. The air. The spot where the hand had been. It was still there. Not the hand itself, but the ghost of it. The air in that one spot was hazy, shimmering faintly under the dim light of the bedroom. It was wrong, and it was cold. I could feel it even from across the room, a pocket of absolute cold. The cold of a meat locker, the cold of a tomb. And then came the smell. It wasn't strong, but it cut through the dusty air of my room with sickening clarity. It was the smell of damp-turned earth, the smell of wet, decaying leaves, the smell of rot, the smell of an open grave. It hung in the air, a poisonous perfume, tainting my bedroom, tainting my home, tainting me. The scar was not on my body, it was in the air. It was the certain, soul-destroying knowledge that the barrier could be broken, that the monster was not trapped behind the glass. The mirror was not a prison. It was a door, and it had just shown me that it knew how to open it. The smell was the worst part. Grave dirt and rot. It clung to the back of my throat, A physical thing. I was on the floor, my back screaming from where it had hit the wall. The cold spot lingered in the middle of the room, a hole in the world, a puncture wound left by that hand. My apartment was no longer mine. It was a contaminated space. Every shadow felt deeper. Every floorboard creak was a footstep. I couldn't run. Where would I go? A hotel? Another apartment? What if it wasn't the mirror? What if it was me? What if I carried this thing with me, a curse I couldn't airdrop to someone else? No, it was the mirror. It had to be the mirror. The hand had come from the glass. The smell came from the glass. The cold came from the glass. I got to my feet. My legs were jelly. I stumbled into the living room, away from the bedroom door, keeping it in my peripheral vision like a caged animal. Living with it was not an option. Waiting for it to reach through again, to touch me, to pull me in. No, I would not be a victim cowering in a corner. I had to do something. I had to fight back. I spent the day like a ghost in my own home. I couldn't eat. The smell of decay killed any appetite. I couldn't sit still. I paced from the small kitchen to the living room window, a tight, repetitive circuit. My thoughts were a frantic storm. How do you kill a reflection? How do you fight something that isn't really there but can still reach into your world? My mind kept replaying the last few minutes. The terror was a white noise, but underneath it I started looking for details. I forced myself to see it again. The hand, pushing through the glass. It hadn't been easy for it. I remembered the look in its eyes, concentration, effort, and the hand itself, it dripped. Not with blood, but with shadows. It was like it was bleeding energy, shedding parts of itself, just to exist in my space for a few seconds. The moment I screamed, the moment my terror gave it the reaction it wanted, it yanked back. Instantly. A retreat. It cost the thing something to cross over. The thought was a life raft in an ocean of fear. It wasn't all powerful. It had limits. The physical world, my world, was hostile territory for it. It could touch, but it couldn't stay. It could terrify, but maybe it couldn't kill. Not from its side, anyway. To do real damage, it had to break the barrier completely. Or I had to. A plan, hot and desperate, began to form. If the glass was its door, I would wall it up. I would shatter it. I would break it into 1,000 pieces and grind them into dust. If it was bleeding energy just to stick a hand through, what would a sledgehammer do to its entire world? The thought of the mirror exploding, of that calm, perfect face shattering into a spiderweb of cracks, was the first good feeling I'd had in days. It was a violent, ugly hope. But it was hope. The building had a maintenance room in the basement. I remembered seeing it once when the super was fixing a pipe. Tools hung on a pegboard wall. Big tools. Heavy tools. The decision was made. Getting the hammer was an ordeal. My nerves were shot. Every step down the concrete stairs to the basement echoed. The dim, flickering fluorescent light made the shadows dance. The maintenance room door was locked, but the lock was old and cheap. A credit card and a minute of fumbling got me in. The room smelled of oil and damp concrete. There it was, hanging on the wall, a 10-pound sledgehammer. The wooden handle was worn smooth. The head was chipped and scarred from 100 different jobs. It felt heavy, solid. It felt real. A piece of my world I could use against a piece of its. I carried it back up to my apartment, holding it tight against my chest. It was my weapon. My salvation. I felt a surge of power, a feeling so foreign I almost didn't recognize it. I was no longer the prey. I was the hunter now. I stood outside my bedroom door. The hammer felt good in my hands. The weight was reassuring. I could do this. One swing. That's all it would take. One good swing, and this nightmare would be over. I took a deep breath, the foul, rotten smell still faint in the air. I pushed the door open, and I stopped. The cold spot was gone. The smell of the grave faded, almost gone. I looked at the mirror. It was just me. No tricks. No delayed movements. No perfect, poised copy. Just me. Ethan. A tired-looking guy in a dirty shirt, holding a sledgehammer. My reflection was breathing hard, just like I was. Its knuckles were white on the handle, just like mine were. It was a perfect, normal reflection. The room behind it was empty and still. The thing was gone. The silence in the room was louder than any scream. This was wrong. All wrong. It wasn't supposed to be this easy. My heart, which had been hammering with adrenaline, now beat with a new, colder rhythm. The rhythm of dread. This was a trap. I knew it. I felt it in my bones. It was playing a new game. I lowered the hammer, my eyes scanning the room. The real room. Nothing. The closet door was shut. Nothing under the bed. The window was locked. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. It was a physical pressure on my skin. I turned back to the mirror. Still just me. A man standing alone in his bedroom. It looked so normal. So innocent. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd won. Maybe my decision to fight back had scared it away. No, it was mocking me. It was showing me the peace I wanted, dangling it in front of my face, daring me to believe it, daring me to lower my guard. I stood dead still in the center of the room, my knuckles white on the handle of the hammer. I didn't move a muscle. I just watched my reflection, waited. My breath was a quiet hiss in the silence. My eyes burned from staring. Come on, do something, show yourself. I don't know how long I stood there. A minute. 10. Time had ceased to matter. There was only the waiting, the silence. My eyes darted away from the mirror for a fraction of a second, scanning the real room again. The closet, the window, the door. Nothing. It had to be a trick. I whipped my head back to the mirror. It was there. It wasn't a gradual appearance. It was instant. One moment, an empty space beside my reflection. The next, it was there. Right there. Its face pressed against the glass, so close that its features were distorted. Its eyes were wide, black pools. Its mouth was a thin, tight line. It was my face, but it was the face of a predator, and in its hands it held a sledgehammer. A perfect, shadowy copy of my own. A gasp caught in my throat. I staggered back a step, my grip tightening on the wooden handle. My world tilted. It had been waiting. It had hidden itself from the reflection, somehow. Now it was here. Face to face, weapon to weapon. The thing in the mirror, the copy of me, was completely still. Its eyes were locked on mine. There was no emotion in them, no anger, no fear. Just a flat, cold intensity. It held its shadow hammer ready, mimicking my stance perfectly. A dark twin, ready for a fight. This was it, the final confrontation. It was me or it. My world or its. I raised the hammer. My muscles screamed in protest, my arms shaking from the weight and the tension. The air felt thick, heavy. It was hard to breathe. The thing in the mirror raised its hammer too. The movement was fluid, effortless, not a copy of my strained motion, but a perfect, idealized version of it. It was ready. It was waiting for my move. I planted my feet, tensed my body for the swing. I would bring all my fear, all my anger, all my hate down on this piece of glass. I would erase it from existence. And then it did something I didn't expect. It smiled. It wasn't a wide, manic grin. It was a small, knowing smirk. A flicker of the lips that was more terrifying than any monstrous face. The eyes didn't change. They stayed cold, watchful. But the mouth smiled. It was the smile of someone who had just won. The smile of someone whose trap had just been sprung perfectly. My arm froze mid-swing. The hammer felt impossibly heavy. What? The thing in the mirror held my gaze. It knew what I was thinking. It knew it had broken my resolve with a simple expression. Then, slowly, it began to raise its shadow hammer higher. Not in a defensive posture. Not to block my blow. It raised the hammer up over its own head, the dark metal passing through the image of the ceiling. It held the pose, its chest exposed, its head unprotected. Its smiling face was an open invitation. The smirk widened slightly. It wasn't preparing to fight me. It was offering itself as a target. It wanted me to do it. It wanted me to smash the glass. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The hammer suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I couldn't hold it. My fingers went numb. The plan. The hope. The one thing I thought would save me was exactly what it wanted all along. Destroying the mirror wasn't the solution. It was the final step. My arm was locked in place. The hammer felt like an anchor. My brain screamed at my muscles, but they wouldn't listen. It wanted me to do it. The thought wasn't a whisper. It was a thunderclap in my head. A siren. The smile on my reflection's face was a confession. I had walked right into its plan, hammer in hand, ready to deliver the final blow myself. The one thing I thought was my salvation was its key. Destroying the mirror wasn't closing the door. It was kicking it off its hinges. What do you do when your only weapon is the one your enemy needs you to use? Draw 'em. I stood there, frozen, a statue of a man holding a hammer. The silence in the room stretched thin. The thing in the glass just watched me, its own shadow hammer held high over its head. The smirk was gone now. The face was blank again. Patient. It could wait. It knew I couldn't. I couldn't live like this. In this constant standoff. I couldn't put the hammer down and go to bed, knowing it was waiting, knowing the trap was still set. Every second I hesitated was another victory for it. The air in the room was thick. I could feel the cold from its side of the glass pushing against the warmth of mine. A battle of atmospheres. My world versus its. A hot rage began to burn through the ice in my veins. It was a primal thing. A cornered animal's fury. So it was a trap. So what? Was I supposed to just stand here until I starved? Or turn around and pretend it didn't exist? Pretend it hadn't reached out and touched my world? No more of its games. No more waiting for it to make the next move. If this was its trap, then I was going to spring it so hard it broke the whole damn machine. Adrenaline surged. A pure, clean fire. I knew this was it. The last play. Win or lose, it ended now. My breath hitched in my chest. I sucked in the stale, rank air of my contaminated bedroom one last time, and I let out a roar. It wasn't a sound of courage. It was a scream of fury and terror torn from my lungs. A raw, ragged noise that was the only weapon I had left, besides the one in my hands. I put everything into that sound. Every sleepless night. Every moment of doubt. The feeling of that cold hand. All of it. I charged. My legs pumped. The floorboards groaned. 2 steps. 3. I was a missile aimed at the heart of the nightmare. The hammer came down from over my shoulder, no longer heavy, but a part of my arm. An extension of my will. My reflection moved in perfect time. A dark puppet on invisible strings. It charged too, its face a mask of my own rage. Our eyes were locked. Its shadow hammer swung down in a mirror of my own arc. We were 2 trains on the same track, speeding toward each other for a final catastrophic impact. The world shrank to the space between my hammer and the glass. Time seemed to bend. In that last fraction of a second, just before the steel head met the surface, I saw it. The thing in the mirror, the copy of me, changed. Its face softened. The rage vanished. Its eyes, those cold, predatory eyes, fluttered shut. A look of profound, serene peace settled over its features. Like a man who had been running a marathon his whole life and was finally allowed to cross the finish line. It wasn't fighting me. It wasn't resisting. It was welcoming it. CHOANG. The sound was not just glass breaking. It was a physical explosion. A sonic boom that tore through the room and slammed into me. It wasn't the tinkling shatter of a window. It was the violent crack of reality itself tearing open. A wave of cold shot out from the now empty frame. Not a draft. It was a solid force. A blast of absolute zero. A void of all heat and life. It smelled of dust and deep, forgotten places. It hit me like a riot shield, lifting me off my feet. The world went sideways. My head cracked against the hardwood floor. The hammer flew from my numb fingers, clattering somewhere in the dark. I lay there, gasping. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine. The air was filled with a glittering dust of pulverized glass. Shards hailed down on me, tiny sharp pinpricks against my skin. Then silence. Not a normal silence. This was new. It was a deep, pure quiet. A complete absence of pressure. I took a breath. The smell of rot and old graves was gone. The air was just air. Dusty, maybe, but clean. I held my breath, listening with every cell in my body. Nothing. The feeling of being watched, that constant heavy weight on my soul for days, was lifted. It had vanished so completely, its absence was a physical sensation. A lightness in my chest. A coolness on my skin where a fever had been. I was alone. I was finally, truly alone in my apartment. I pushed my head up. The room was a wreck. A cascade of silver-backed glass shards covered the floor, sparkling like a field of deadly diamonds under the light from the hallway. The mirror frame on the wall was an empty, jagged-toothed mouth. The trap had sprung, and I was still here. A laugh bubbled up from my chest. It was a broken wheezing sound at first. Then it caught. I rolled onto my back, ignoring the sharp bites of glass against my shirt, and I laughed. A loud, booming, half-insane laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. I laughed until my sides ached, and tears streamed from my eyes. Tears of joy. I won. Whatever that thing was, whatever its game was, I had won. I had stared into the abyss, and I had smashed its face in. The fear was gone, burned away by the fury of that final charge. Slowly I pushed myself up. My body ached. I could feel a dozen small cuts on my arms and hands, tiny trickles of blood beading on the surface. I didn't care. They were badges of honor, scars from a battle I had survived. I stood, my legs shaky but strong, in the middle of the glittering wreckage. I looked at the empty frame on the wall. It was just a piece of wood now. Powerless. Defeated. I took a deep, clean breath. My lungs felt bigger. The world seemed brighter. A feeling washed over me, something I hadn't felt in years. It was more than just relief. It was power. Confidence. I had faced down an impossible entity, a thing that defied logic and physics, and I had destroyed it. I wasn't the scared, isolated man cowering in his apartment anymore. I was a survivor, a giant killer. I walked over to the closet, my bare feet crunching on the glass. I didn't even feel it. I opened the door. The inside of the door had a full-length mirror. I had forgotten it was even there. I looked at my reflection. It was me. Just me. Ethan. A guy with wild, messy hair and a torn, dirty shirt. A few bloody scratches on his face. He looked tired. He looked like he'd been through hell. He looked back at me, and a slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't my smile, not the weak, hesitant thing I was used to. This was a wide, confident, victorious grin. A predator's smile. The eyes were the same. His knuckles were white, just like mine. He was breathing hard, just like I was. It was a perfect, normal reflection. And it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. The cleanup took 3 days. 3 days of sweeping, vacuuming, and carefully picking silver-backed slivers of glass out of the floorboards. I threw out the rug. It was hopeless, seeded with a million tiny daggers. I even threw out the empty wooden frame. I put it all in 3 heavy-duty trash bags, hauled them down 3 flights of stairs, and dumped them in the building's dumpster with a feeling of immense satisfaction. A burial. For the first time in weeks, the air in my apartment was just air. The sun coming through the window felt warm, not like the light of an interrogation lamp. I felt light. The constant weight was gone. I had faced the monster in my own home, and I had won. The knowledge was a heady drug, better than any coffee or shot of whiskey. It hummed in my veins. Power. I was going out tonight. A real night out. To a bar. With people. Loud music and sticky floors. I needed it. I needed to wash the memory of silence out of my ears. I showered, shaved, and put on a clean shirt that didn't have the faint smell of sweat and fear woven into the fabric. While I searched for my keys, I whistled. It was some stupid pop song from the radio, a cheerful, brainless tune that felt like a declaration of independence. My keys weren't on the hook by the door, not on the kitchen counter. I finally found them in the pocket of the jeans I'd worn yesterday. I slipped them into my hand. The cold metal felt good, familiar. My fingers closed around them, a perfect fit. The jagged edge of the car key rested against my index finger, the circular fob nestled in my palm. It felt right, more than right. It felt like an extension of my hand, a tool I was born to wield. A weird thought. I shook my head, the happy tune on my lips faltering for just a second. Just the last dregs of weirdness leaving my system. I was a new man, a stronger one. Of course things felt different. I grabbed my wallet off the dresser and headed for the door, the whistle starting up again. My steps were confident on the hardwood floors. I walked down the short hallway that led from the bedroom to the living room. On the wall to my left was a single, lonely picture hook. An old, cheap, decorative mirror used to hang there. Not the big one, just a small, circular thing I'd taken down weeks ago, long before the real trouble started. I stopped. The whistle died in my throat. I stared at the empty hook. There was nothing there. Just a painted wall. So why did I stop? I hadn't even consciously looked at it. My body had just stopped. A shiver, small and cold, traced a line up my spine. For a second, just a split second, the air felt heavy again. That old familiar pressure. No, I wasn't doing this. It was over. It was a memory, an echo. Nothing more. I took a breath. I looked down at my hand, the one holding the keys. I flexed my fingers. One by one, they curled and uncurled. They moved with a precision, a fluid grace that didn't feel like me. My hands had always been a little clumsy. I dropped things. I fumbled. This hand, this machine of bone and muscle felt different. It felt like a surgeon's hand. Or a killer's. "Get a grip, Ethan," I mumbled. The sound of my own voice was strange, too loud in the new quiet. I tried to shake the feeling off. Just a little game. I decided to drop the keys. Just let them fall. A simple act of will. Let go. My fingers wouldn't open. I stared at my knuckles, white and tight around the metal. My brain sent the command. Let go. The message traveled down my arm, a clear-as-day signal. But it hit a wall somewhere in my wrist. The connection was dead. My hand stayed clenched. It wasn't paralyzed. It wasn't numb. It was just disobedient. It had its own plan. My heart gave a hard, painful kick against my ribs. Wait, something's not right. I walked slowly into the living room. The afternoon light was fading. The big television screen against the far wall was off. A black, glossy rectangle. A dark mirror. I walked toward it, my feet moving as if wading through thick water. The face that looked back at me from the screen was a dim, distorted version of my own. A shadow in dark glass. I needed to see it. I needed to prove myself wrong. I forced my lips to pull back from my teeth. A smile. A big, stupid, happy smile. See? It's me. Just me. Everything's fine. In the dark screen, the reflection smiled back. And it was the wrong smile. It was the one from the closet mirror. The wide, confident, victorious grin. It wasn't the hesitant, shaky thing I had just forced onto my face. This was a smile that knew things I didn't. A smile that owned the room. A predator's smile. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. My own smile collapsed. My mouth fell open. My face went slack with a dawning, sickening horror. The face on the screen didn't change. The smile stayed, nailed in place, a silent, gloating crescent in the dark glass. It watched me, its owner, crumble. It watched me with my own eyes. No, 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 no. My breath came in, short, ragged gasps. I could hear a roaring sound in my ears, the sound of blood pumping in a desperate, frantic rhythm. This can't be happening. I smashed it. I killed it. I was alone. I was safe. With a trembling, jerky motion, I raised my hand. The one that wouldn't drop the keys. I brought it up to my face. I had to feel it. I had to know. My fingertips, cold and alien, touched my own cheek. The sensation was all wrong. It was like touching a stranger, like touching a rubber mask. I could feel the skin, the bone underneath, but there was a disconnect, a layer of something between my mind and the flesh it was supposed to control. The muscles in my face were not mine. They were his. They were holding that terrible smile, even as my mind screamed in terror. He had me. Oh, God, he had me. The whole time. The charge. The roar. The hammer. It wasn't a trap I had to spring. It was an invitation I had to accept. A guttural sound tore from my throat, a choked sob of pure terror. I stumbled backward, away from the mocking face in the TV, my legs clumsy and weak. I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going. My body just ran, fueled by the last vestiges of my own will. I ran back toward the bedroom. Back to the scene of the crime. My bare feet hit the floor of the bedroom. The crunch of glass under my soles sent sharp, stabbing pains at my legs. But I didn't feel them. My world had shrunk to the roaring in my ears, and the horrifying realization that I was a prisoner in my own body. He was in the driver's seat. He was wearing me like a suit. I fell to my knees in the middle of the glittering disaster zone. Shards of the broken mirror were everywhere, a carpet of deadly jewels. My hands scrabbled at the floor, pushing through the sharp fragments. I needed to see. I needed one last look. My fingers closed around a large, jagged piece of the mirror. It was heavy, silver-backed, a piece from the very heart of the nightmare. I lifted it. My hands, his hands, were steady, not a tremor. I looked into the shard. It wasn't a reflection. It was a window. And in the window, I saw my own face. My real face. Distorted by a terror so profound, it was inhuman. My eyes were wide, blown out with panic. My mouth was open in a scream, a raw, silent, desperate scream that made no sound. Tears streamed down my cheeks. It was the face of a man being buried alive, the face of a soul trapped in hell. It was me, the real me, trapped on the other side. I watched myself scream. Then, slowly, the head in the room, the head attached to the body I was in, tilted. The thing that was me now, the creature standing on the glass-strewn floor, looked down at the shard in its hand. It looked at the screaming, terrified face of the man it had replaced, and it smiled, not the wide, gloating grin. This was a different smile. It was calm, gentle, peaceful even, the serene look of a marathon runner who had finally, after a lifetime of running, crossed the finish line. It was the same look the thing in the mirror had given me in that final second, the look of welcome. The realization hit me, not with the force of a hammer, but with the cold, quiet finality of a closing coffin lid. Smashing the mirror wasn't an attack. It was the final, required step. It wasn't an act of destruction. It was a handshake, a signature on a contract, the key turning in the lock. It was me, agreeing to the swap.